it's less than a week since Charlie Kirk was assassinated.
When you see somebody die in front of you, you don't forget that. We have become so desensitized to the value of human life that we think the politics matter. We live in this weird world where there's this incredible distrust of government and simultaneously this incredible overestimate of the effectiveness of government. When you're an insider and you know how the world works, you have this responsibility to say what you think will play out. You understand probabilities and you understand human behavior and you understand the fact that nothing is really original, right? History just repeats itself over and over again. Not with the operation that we cover in Shadow Cell, because Shadow Cell was unique. When you're building a terrorist cell to operate against an adversary on behalf of the Central Intelligence Agency, you know you're doing something that needs to be documented.
Were you ever ordered to do or ended up doing something that you had kind of a moral objection or conflict to and you decided to do it anyway, or it made you decide not to do something that you should have?
So
Since the Civil War, dogs have stood alongside our military, proving to be indispensable partners. Our military prioritized ensuring proper canine nutrition for optimal performance, recognizing its vital role in mission success. Team Dog embodies that standard, offering science-based, customizable meal plans tailored to your dog's unique needs. Developed by a former Navy SEAL and canine trainer, Team Dog Food ensures the highest quality nutrition for our canine companions. Improve your dog's well-being. Be your dog's hero with Team Dog.
Ladies and gentlemen, as always, it's both an honor and a pleasure to welcome my next guest back to the podcast. He was on episode 206, about almost 2 years ago to the day, in terms of publishing it. He's a former CIA intelligence officer. He's the founder of Everyday Spy and the host of the Everyday Spy podcast, which I got to tell you, the YouTube algorithm I think feels that I need an Everyday Spy enema with how much I see your face on my feed. It's amazing. But he's also the author of the recently released book Shadow Cell, which is an insider account of America's new spy war, which I can't think of a better time for that book to come out and to have you on the show with all the different stuff that's going on. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, Andy Bustamante.
I'm super stoked to be back here, man. And the algorithm for YouTube is absolutely on my side.
Yeah,
I can't. It's the worst thing in the world when I try to defend how I'm not a CIA plant.
Yeah, nobody believes you.
Nobody, and I wouldn't believe my shit either, because I'm looking at that and I'm like, how in the hell does this happen?
I see that all the time. I mean, I see it with a lot of people on YouTube that have shows that have anything to do with government or politics, military, and CIA shill, and he's a fucking State Department plant, and he's a Mossad fucking guy, and and it's just like, man, I think you're given. It's not to say that there aren't some very curiously fucked up elements of not just our government that does stuff like that, but also other governments. I'm not naive to the fact that I know there's a component to that, but to think that I think any government agency could pull it off for very long at this point.
That's what gets me too.
Yeah.
We live in this weird world, especially in the United States, where there's this incredible distrust of government and simultaneously this incredible overestimate of the effectiveness of government.
Yeah.
Because you'd have to think that they're really fucking good at what they do to plant media personalities that go viral. Mm-hmm. And somehow they can't keep a president from getting shot at when he's on the road to presidency, right? So how can they not do one thing but they do the other really well? That's not the government I'm used to. The government I'm used to does pretty much everything badly.
Up, yeah. Well, I mean, especially our government, to me in today's day and age with ChatGPT and AI and the ability to search massive amounts of databases and access that hackers and even just remotely computer literate or competent people have, it's like even if that was the intended goal and the project, if you want to call it that, I could see it an episode or two, but very quickly any of that stuff that gains traction, to me, like the collective U.S. society, in many ways a good way, are more effective than opposition research for political campaigns in finding shit out about people, and I just, I don't think that our government is capable of putting somebody in that position for long enough to where it wasn't found out, because you'd have to have so many dots connected in a flawless way for decades, really. I mean, you'd have to manufacture records and historical databases for somebody's life, for somebody not to find some glitch or some timeline that doesn't line up, or some ability to prove that somebody's full of shit, or whatever. Like, people are so good at that now. And again, I think that's overwhelmingly positive, because it's way harder for people running for office to pull the wool over people's eyes. But it never ceases to amaze me how many people throw that out there, though. Normally I would ask kind of the relatively boilerplate lightning round questions, but since you were here on 206, we already went through that. And I feel like there are so many things current events wise. Number one, if you want to hear Andy's story, please check out episode 206. It was a great episode. But I want to dig both into the book, and especially with what's happened the last week, get your take on some of this stuff. Before we do that, though, just what have you been up to in the last 2 years to catch us up quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been a very exciting 2 years. The company's grown significantly. My internet presence continues to grow, which is really an exciting additional benefit to running a business.
Yeah.
I think the big thing for me that's really been important to watch, CIA likes to be wrong, and I don't think people realize that. When you're an insider like you were, and you know how the world works, you have this responsibility to say what you think will play out, but you always kind of hope that you're wrong.
Yeah.
Right? You always hope that you're being pessimistic, you're being overly negative, you're being fatalist or alarmist, but you got to say it because you understand probabilities and you understand human behavior and you understand the fact that nothing is really original, right? History just repeats itself over and over again. And the last 2 years for me have been just a stark reminder of how much I really wish I could be wrong more often. I've been warning people about leaving the U.S. I've been warning about the decline of the U.S. dollar and the economy. I've been warning about, partisan politics. I've been out there saying this stuff, and obviously the algorithm picks it up, and people must feel it at some level because we keep watching it, we keep talking about it. But to actually see it playing out over the last 2 years, to see, the high-profile killings in both the business sector and the political sector, to watch our economy just struggle, to watch immigration do what immigration's doing, it's difficult, man. So it's been a weird juxtaposition to make so much business and internet growth out of so much bad news, because it's a weird feeling to go home and watch your bank account get bigger because your predictions are coming true.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. I mean, it's to me. I mean, it's almost, obviously it's not Oracle-like in that there's some mysticism to, how you forecast certain things trending a certain direction. But to me, it does kind of remind me of like the fortune teller that doesn't want to break the bad news to the person sitting across them, but does because they feel obligated. But with all of the predictions you've made and trends that you've seen, is there one or even several that stand out as being either the most problematic, or maybe you were kind of almost laughed at the most on, or one that people scoffed at or said that you're a conspiracy theorist or this is crazy, that'll never happen, that you have been right on, that comes to mind?
So the biggest one out there is really, it ties back to Ukraine and Russia, which is where a lot of my kind of people's awareness of me came from. Because I made a prediction back early on when Russia first invaded Ukraine, talking about the fact that the press would lose interest, but that Russia was engaged in what was truly an existential threat, and that Ukraine would lose interest. People would lose interest in Ukraine. The EU would lose interest. NATO would lose interest. The United States would lose interest. And there'd be a significant decline in support for Ukraine. And that Russia would use that decline to kind of push further in, specifically trying to close off the Black Sea, reaching all the way to Odessa. Now, when I made that prediction the first time, it was like August of 2022. the war looked very different than it looks now. It was before the counteroffensive that gained so much ground for Ukraine. And a lot of people criticized me because instead of having Russia reach over to Odessa, there was a counteroffensive in the late summer of 2022. And I remember watching all the accusations and all the, this guy's, whatever his predictions age like sour milk and all these other, hate speech coming across. And I remember just sitting there watching and saying, you guys, you don't understand. Like, intelligence doesn't happen on a timeline. It happens in a series, in order. Now here we are in 2025. Russia's making gains that it never made before. It's dropping bombs in Kiev. You've got more people pushing against it than ever before in Europe, but they're still not funding Ukraine. Ukraine has had to try to prove that it's worth investment by developing its drone industry, a drone industry that has been largely replicated by China, that we, the United States, are just now trying to catch up to. So Russia hasn't changed. They have not become any less aggressive in their intention to not just take eastern Ukraine, which has always been their priority, but in cutting Ukraine off from the rest of NATO. And they've become bolder and stronger in their opposition, in their position, in the face of Zelensky, in the face of NATO with the Trump presidency. So it's not, what we're seeing is that Russia really will not back away from this because they know they can't. To back away from Ukraine, if you're in Putin's shoes, is essentially to undermine your economic success, to kill Russia. And he's not going to let that happen. It is partly tied to his political reputation, but it's largely tied to their country's existence because Russia needs its satellite states to maintain a viable economy. And that's what we're trying to kill with sanctions, and that's why it's partnered up so closely with Iran and China. So I say that because, not that I think the world's necessarily paying attention to Ukraine and Russia. I think that, like I predicted, people lose interest. There's many more interesting things right now than whether or not one side or the other gained another 100 yards of territory. But that's exactly what I said what would happen. And as we continue to watch the near term and the long-term future of the Russia-Ukraine issue, it's important to me that we understand Russia knows how Americans think. He knows how Europeans think, and he knows that given enough time, we're going to light ourselves on fire, which is exactly what's happening in France right now. We're going to dissolve our own governments, which is what happened in Portugal and which is what happened in Germany. We're going to doubt our own political system, which is what's happening in the United States. Russia knows us so well, they just keep pressing.
So, I mean, to me, I don't disagree with any of that. I am curious from a kind of like from the intelligence analyst 30,000 foot view perspective. Who gives a shit? And to your point, like I understand and totally get why a lot of Americans, especially right now with some of the things that are happening here in the United States, could care less, especially when you see the amounts of money that we've sent them and how it's drug on and seems to be a bit of a stalemate, largely speaking. But from your perspective, why should America care?
I don't necessarily think that Americans need to care. I think what Americans need to understand is that the story they were sold when Russia first invaded Ukraine was a lie. And I don't know that we've necessarily woken up to that yet. I think people still believe that Ukraine is a fight for democracy when it's not. Ukraine is a test bed, a battlefield where we can make advancements in our technology and field test them and simultaneously gain commitments from both Russia and Ukraine that when the conflict ends, the United States will have first dibs of going in and rebuilding the country, which is a massive economic benefit for us. That's what Trump sees in Ukraine. He understands there are rare earth minerals and those are going to be valuable to us, especially as we try to hedge against China. But more importantly, there's been so much destruction, all of that has to be rebuilt. And an American company could rebuild it all. American loans could rebuild it, American debt could rebuild it, American issuances of lease could rebuild it, and that's a major benefit for us that he doesn't want NATO to have, and he doesn't want some foreign country to have.
So, I mean, from that standpoint, my first thought is, how about fucking Detroit and Chicago first? Like, why don't we worry about fixing those places and a host of other, cities and even regions within the United States? Is it because we have to pay for that, and if we're rebuilding in Ukraine, somebody else is, and there's actually money to be made?
Correct. It's all about the currency, and this is an important piece. I'm glad that you asked the question, because under the Biden administration, we printed a shit ton of new money. Yeah. Well, if you only have a certain amount of value, right? Let's just imagine 3 gold bars sit on one side of a scale. That's all the real value you have. You can print as many dollars as you want, but the only real value is the 3 gold bars. So then how do you make it so that all of these dollars are worth more per dollar? That's what counter-inflation is, right? Right now we're experiencing inflation, more money with less value per dollar. Well, how do we get more value per dollar? You have to add more gold to the pile. Well, the United States only has a fixed amount of gold, only a fixed amount of value. The only way you get more value is from foreigners putting their value into our US dollar. So that's what we need to have happen. We can't just, you can technically take dollars off the market and destroy them to force more value per dollar, but the more efficient way is to keep all those dollars in circulation and add more gold bricks. That's why we care about foreign investment. That's why we sell apartments in Miami to fucking Cubans and Chinese, because we're trying to get foreign currency to convert their currency to US dollars because it increases you and me the value that's specifically in our wallet. That's one of the benefits to going into a war zone. You go into a war zone, that shit's already destroyed. You go into Detroit, you would technically have to destroy what's there before you could build anything new. And how are you going to get state, municipal, county support to go in there and gut or even demolish buildings?
I mean, I certainly understand the premise, but when I look at, just from a business owner standpoint, which, I've certainly never run anything that was anywhere near, the type of levels of capital investment that we're talking about. But to me, moving a decimal point is really the only difference. The principle is the exact same. And when I look at the amount of money that we've sent there already, though, which further causes the problem that you're talking about, to me at this point, we're what, 200 and some billion dollars that we've sent there? Or, I mean, maybe even 300. I don't even know what it is. I'm not even sure that our government has been completely transparent on how much, and that's not including all of the investment, weaponry-wise. So to me, it's like, well, we've already put so much money into it. To me, it's not a one-to-one conversion in terms of if U.S. We'll say semi-private companies, because some of them are so infused into the government, I don't think you can call them entirely private sector companies. But the Halliburtons, the Raytheons, the whatever, let's say they're contracted to go in there. To me, the travesty is that the American taxpayer doesn't get paid back a one-to-one ratio on that. Even if, let's say, best case scenario, not only are we able to break even dollar for dollar, or even make money, like the taxpayer is still the one that took it on the chin for having to shell out all the tax revenue to benefit them in the first place. So if you're Donald Trump and we're keeping with your theory of the decision to put so much time and energy and bandwidth into the Ukraine-Russia conflict, how does that shake out to a net positive benefit to the United States?
So it's important to understand there's two things that we're talking about, even though we're using one term, right? When we talk about the net benefit of the United States, that's not really one thing. There's the benefit to the American taxpayer, which is a current thing, and then there's the benefit to the United States, as in the United States government, which is a long-term thing. One of the things that I think Americans have not been conditioned to understand well enough, because again, we've been conditioned, we just haven't been conditioned with the truth. We haven't been conditioned to understand that our true value to the federal government is really nothing more than paying our taxes. That's, unless you dedicate your life and put your life on the line for your country also, which you and I both did in uniform, really the only other thing they care about is whether or not you generate taxes and how can they maximize the amount of taxes that you generate. This is why we're very pro-business in the United States. If you look at one person, you can only tax that one person so much. But if that one person creates a hotel, and that hotel has 200 rooms, and those 200 rooms have 90% occupancy throughout the year, every one of those rooms creates tax, the building creates tax, all of the jobs inside the hotel create tax. So they are willing to tax the person who owns the hotel less because they can tax everything else so much. But at the end of the day, all they care about is U.S. citizen creates taxes. We always take it on the chin. That's our job in the government. That's our job as citizens, is to take it on the chin, pay the taxes, pay for the machine to run, understanding that the machine isn't investing in us right now. It's investing in future returns, 20-year returns, 50-year returns, 200-year returns. If I'm in Donald Trump's shoes, I'm not trying to put more money into Ukraine. We've already put too much money into Ukraine. I'm trying to find a way to cut the amount of money that we put into Ukraine without losing the benefits that we already invested in. If he can get Putin to stop firing and he can get Ukraine to stop firing, we kind of keep the benefits. And the benefits are not necessarily Ukraine for us. There's an immediate financial benefit in rebuilding Ukraine, but the bigger benefit to us is that all of the NATO allies buy American weapons. We are the world's top weapons exporter. Russia's number 2, China's number 3. So if we can export the most weapons, that's all free money. That's free foreign currency coming into US dollars. That's more gold bars that benefit us. Well, if we abandon Ukraine and NATO steps in to help Ukraine, they're going to diversify who they buy their weapons from. They're going to start making more weapons and buying from each other. They might start buying Chinese weapons. They might start buying Indian weapons. There's plenty of countries that are trying to get in there, right? So Trump is trying to find a way to not give up the investment that we've made. It's a sunk cost. That would be the term he would use, right? It's a sunk cost. But how do we not lose everything from the sunk cost? And I'm not defending that we need to care about Russia or Ukraine right now. We have major domestic issues. What's frustrating to me is that part of the domestic issues we have is that there's still half of the country out there that believes that getting involved in Ukraine at all was the right thing to do. There's still people out there who think that there's a fight for democracy that we're not fighting for. And that kind of misalignment of ideas is what's in large part driving our domestic issues right now.
Yeah. I mean, to me, the most frustrating part is that, to reduce the decision whether or not to get involved at all, and to both reduce it and base it off of potential economic benefit and stimulus, to me is a huge misstep. To me that shouldn't play the role. Not that it shouldn't be a factor, but if back in whatever year, what was it, 22 when it started? It kind of right in the middle of Biden's presidency. I'm curious if that was his take, or his administration's take was the same as Donald Trump's, or was it a skimming operation, where dozens or even hundreds of American politicians got filthy rich by skimming off the top of some of the money that was given? Because I've seen and heard a lot of those types of claims. I don't know if you have anything to back any of that up or not, but it drives me nuts.
Well, it's a very common thing for politicians to make money off of some adjacent activity related to the politics that they're in. In many ways, that's how they get to politics, right? That's how the Clinton Foundation became a thing. That's how many different senators and congresspeople have any kind of wealth beyond their annual paycheck, right? It's because they're affiliated with things, they're affiliated with projects, they're affiliated with associations, they're even affiliated with foundations, profit and for-profit and nonprofit. And I mean, you've seen this even with former military folks. That's why Trump is revoking clearances. You spend a whole career making $80,000 a year, and then when you retire, you work for a contracting firm making $250,000 a year, $400,000 a year. And your job is really just to make sure that the contractor you work for wins the contract with the Army or the Navy or the Air Force or whatever else. It's a very common thing that is the second career for public servants. I would also say that if you really get down to the brass tacks, in 2022, Biden wanted eyes off of COVID. He wanted eyes off of the reactions to the missteps, the errors that we made with COVID. And it was really easy to unify or try to unify the United States around the biggest enemy of all time, Russia. How could you not want to fight Russia? How could you not want to defend democracy? Well, it turns out after about 4 months, we didn't want to defend democracy. We didn't want to fight for the causes that the Biden administration were trying to fight for. The Trump administration isn't necessarily better, they're just different. there's also things happening that Trump is very happy to let us focus on something else because of missteps in one area, whether that's the economy, whether that's not being able to reach a peace accord between Russia and Ukraine, whether that's the ongoing hostility with Israel and Hamas. So there's all sorts of conveniences that we have to recognize also play out in the presidency.
Yeah. I appreciate the insight. Do you have the comprehension from Putin's standpoint? Like, would you say that you're comfortable saying that you have a thorough understanding of his decision to go into Ukraine, what the driving force was?
So I would hesitate to say a thorough understanding of his perspective. I think I have a solid understanding of the pros and cons, the motivations and the vulnerabilities of him pushing into Ukraine. And the biggest thing is really tying back to the idea that Russia understands that it's seen as the largest threat in Europe, and that its allies don't exist in Europe. Its allies exist as practical partnerships, pragmatic partnerships with other large authoritarian countries. So if Russia has to rely on just what it has inside its own national borders, it knows it can't support its economy. So it has to have resources, it has to have natural resources, it has to have reach outside of its own borders. And that's what drives it to take places like Georgia and Crimea and to put threats on, to engage in what's happening in Belarus and Azerbaijan. And it knows that it needs those foreign satellite states.
Yeah. I guess, moving on from that, unless there's anything else that makes sense to bring up with it, you mentioned Israel and Hamas, and since that's something that's been ongoing now for a while too, I'd love to get your take on it, because that's taken place since the last time you were here. I mean, it was right after you were here, actually, that October 7th happened, and this whole, dust storm kind of re-kicked up. I would ask you kind of the same question from the analyst standpoint when you look at the United States from a existential standpoint, whether it's a threat or whatever. Our involvement there and kind of the weaving of Israel's politics here in the United States, and similarly, like, there's stuff all over the internet, and at this point it's impossible to discern what's propaganda versus true, and if there's elements of truth to some of the claims or not, or whatever. Like, I don't know how you even keep track of it. From an intel analyst standpoint, what is your take on what's going on there, similarly to Russia and Ukraine?
Yeah, the thing to understand in Israel is to understand that being a Palestinian is different than being a member of a terrorist organization, Hamas, which is different from being labeled a terrorist organization by the United States and only 12 other countries, where the rest of the world sees Hamas as a legally voted political party that Gaza voted into power over the Palestinian Authority, and I think it was 1996. So there's all these overlapping kind of Venn diagram elements that are worth understanding, because everybody tries to reduce it, simplify it to something like a war on terror. This is not a war on terror. The tens of thousands, I think 50-ish thousand deaths, are not terrorist deaths. The idea that Netanyahu is continuing to press an offensive into the Gaza Strip, he is adamantly opposed to giving the Palestinians their own state. This is Israeli politics, Israeli governance. This is not Jewishness, right? So we've got all these overlapping issues: anti-Semitism, which is tied to Judaism, which is the state religion of Israel, but not commentary on Israel itself. You can disagree with Netanyahu without hating Jews. You can say something negative about the decisions of the Israeli government without being labeled an anti-Semite.
Well, that's tough. I mean, and similarly, I think on the other side of the coin, just in the exact same way, you almost can't sympathize with the state of Israel and not be labeled a baby killer by pro-Palestinian folks.
Correct.
And on the other side, any shred of sympathy for anybody living in Palestine by somebody who's super pro-Israel is going to label you, basically a terrorist. And it's like there's these polar opposite absolutes that make it really, really difficult, A, to understand, and B, to navigate how you even sort through it.
Exactly, and that's the problem that we've reached as a society. And I put the responsibility for that problem on the systems that indoctrinate us, that rule us, whether it's less about the media and more about the narrative that the government weaves that the media then picks up.
Folks, just a quick heads up, I do have a Team Dog Patreon tier where I answer questions via video, either just describing the answer to the question or even demonstrating some of it. So go to our Mic Drop Patreon page, check out the Team Dog tier, and I look forward to seeing you in there. Thank you much.
When it comes to the academic and operational facts of the matter, being a Palestinian does not make you a terrorist. Being a Palestinian does not make you sympathetic towards Hamas, the terrorist group. You can be a Palestinian who voted for the Hamas political organization that takes care of your hospitals and your schools and your food, and still disagree with the Hamas militant wing that goes on carrying out terrorist activities. There's a hard step between the two, between Palestinian and Hamas, terrorist. There's also a hard step between Israeli and Jew. There's a big step between the two. Israeli is just what's on your passport, right? Jew is what you believe in. You can be a Jew and not have an Israeli passport. You can have an Israeli passport and not be Jewish. But we have created this echo chamber where the two extremes are the only people talking. And the silent majority sits in the middle, afraid to say what they believe, or is afraid to ask a question, afraid to have an opinion, because they don't want to be labeled an anti-Semite, and they also don't want to be labeled pro-terrorism.
From my perspective, the single point of failure, or maybe that's not the right characterization, that the single biggest issue, I think, is frankly the internet, and specifically social media with that, is that to me it reminds me of a lot of domestic hotbed political topics where, let's say, we'll take abortion or the border. I'll use both. Abortion, it's like, I kind of lean towards the right to choose. So you enjoy murdering children.
Correct.
No. On the same token, hey, I think abortion should be illegal. Oh, so you want to, enslave women and not let them make a single decision about their own body. It's like, no. The border, the same thing. It's like, I think we should have a secure border. So you're a fucking racist and you want nobody other than blue-eyed white people in the country. Like, no. And I think these absolutes, whether it's algorithmic or if it bleeds, it leads, the more extreme something is, the more it gets pushed into people's feeds. And I would love to know what the stat is on your average American above the age of 18 to 65, we'll say, how many hours a day is spent scrolling social media apps on average? I'm sure that it's hours, several hours a day.
So those metrics exist. I don't know them off the top of my head. They are shocking numbers. The shocking numbers are the hours that are spent on social media for the age demographic that you're talking about. Specifically, it's more like 18 to 35, 18 to 50, right? Because after a certain age, they don't know how to use social media efficiently. So the number of hours spent, but the bigger thing for me is how many people, as an exclusive source of news, use social media. And that is a huge, huge number. I think it's 30% of social media users view the social media that they're using as their only source of news. Not a newspaper that they buy from the street, not even a newspaper website, right? Not the news that's on television. It is literally what comes across their feed in social media. That is their source of news. They don't know how to vet they don't know how to vet a source of information. They don't know how to cross-reference information. They don't understand journalistic intent. It's just if their social media feed feeds them something that is called news, then they consider it news.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think to further complicate it with how easy technology has made it for your average everyday person to manipulate stories or create false stories that are a complete fabrication, not just altered, complete bullshit. It makes it impossible to discern what's real or not, and it's becoming more and more difficult. Same with, especially on the Israel-Hamas stuff or even the Ukraine-Russia stuff that we've talked about. news clips or video clips that aren't even real, or saying something happened with no video to back it up, or saying something happened with manufactured video to back it up. It's like living in the Matrix, and it makes you feel crazy. Like, I don't even know what the fuck is happening. So again, keeping that intel analyst hat on, like, how do you make sense of all of that then? And is there a recommendation you could make for your average citizen to be able to discern what's what?
My recommendation for any everyday person is not often well received, because the only real thing that we can do is we have to take responsibility for our own opinions. We have to develop our own opinions by researching, cross-referencing, following multiple news sources, not just following your favorite news source. It means you have to flip the channel every now and then off of CNN and onto Fox. And you need to flip the channel every now and then off of Fox and onto CNN. And you should probably pick up a magazine called The Economist, which comes out of the UK, and you should probably read BBC. And you might want to take a look at France 24 and look at foreign news sources just as much as you look at American news sources, because in that conglomeration of information, you will find points that intersect, and those are facts. And then you'll be able to differentiate between the factual information and all of the noise and all of the opinion that's out there. There's something in the intel world that we worry about constantly. It's called circular reporting. Circular reporting is when you hear something from one source, but then that thing that you heard from one source gets repeated by another source. So let's just say you and you're DOD intelligence and I'm CIA intelligence, and we're both talking to the same person. That person tells you the same secret that they tell me. Well, now when you and I are talking to the president, you give the president a secret, I give the president the same secret. The president's like, oh, I just heard that from both DOD and CIA, it must be true, not realizing it came from the same source here. When somebody like AP, the Associated Press, when they put out a story, that story gets picked up by hundreds of other news outlets, and oftentimes just repeated, and then the news outlet puts their own name on it. And maybe down at the bottom, at the very end of the article, they say, attributed to the Associated Press. But now you and I see a story from the Associated Press, and we might see it 4 other times on our own feed, and not realize that's not 4 independent journalists confirming anything. That's 4 journalists who have just copied and pasted what they found off of the morning Daily Wire, right?
So how do you discern that then? How do you come to the conclusion that it is actually corroborated through independent sources and not a telephone game?
The best thing you can do is actually follow multiple conflicting sources. You want to follow foreign sources and domestic sources, and the domestic sources and the foreign sources you follow should be conservative and liberal sources. You have to bring in voices that would never intentionally collaborate with each other. And then when there's overlap, that's the corroboration. When you know that the same sources for Fox are not the same sources for CNN. Even if there is some overlap, 90% of the overlap, or 90% of their sources are going to be completely different sources, because they're looking for conservative-leaning voices, they're looking for liberal-leaning voices. So when you get the final finished report out of both and you cross-reference, that's how you find discernible, high-probability fact.
Yeah.
But you're not going to find much. So you're going to do a lot of effort to find out very little. So the next thing that you have to do is follow it over time. You can't be interested while you're taking a dump on Monday night and then come to a conclusion by the time you wipe your ass on Monday night. You have to follow it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and you have to come to a conclusion after a few days of following the instance.
Yeah, that's good advice for sure. Bringing it back to the Israel-Palestine-Hamas scenario, again, because it's such a prevalent issue that seems to consume a lot of Americans' lives more so than you would think, given how quickly we have lost interest in Ukraine, or pick any other thing. Mm-hmm. This is one thing that continues to, I would say, invade people's feeds and algorithms and thought processes, et cetera. What is it about Palestine and Israel that is different? that there's so much stronger staying power with that issue by itself.
It's not really about Palestine and Israel. That's the important thing. What it's about now is it's about Israel and Netanyahu. That's really what it's about. To get our eyes off of Gaza, because Netanyahu wanted the world to stop focusing on Gaza, because as we focused on Gaza, it became a very simple bully kind of equation. Like the Palestinian civilians in Gaza have no standing military, no way to defend themselves. Their hospitals are being bombed. There's food shortages. There's nothing but crisis for the Gazan Palestinians. So Netanyahu knew he needed something to take the world's attention off of that. So after he had essentially neutered Hezbollah and Hamas, he went after the source. He went after Iran. That got us all looking at Iran. So now there was an Iran-Israel war for 13 days that culminated with the U.S. sending bombers and bombing Iran enrichment facilities, right? That's where the staying power came from, because now there's a new conflict and Israel's attacking Iran. Now Israel's bombing, and then Israel was bombing Syria after the fall of the Assad regime. Now they're bombing Qatar. Then they were killing Hamas leadership all over the Levant. The reason we keep watching this is because now Americans are criticizing Israel. Now Americans are saying, well, where's Israel going to stop? Turkey is worried that Israel is going to bomb inside Turkish borders, and the United States is going to continue to support them. Qatar houses the largest military base in the Middle East for the United States. And Israel violated Qatari sovereignty to bomb negotiators and their families in a secure base that was guaranteed with protection by the Qatari government. So Israel's taking steps that have gone beyond their original justification of we're trying to protect ourselves by eliminating an imminent terrorist threat in Gaza. Now they're fucking bombing sovereign American allies. I can understand why. Donald Trump understands why, which is why at the UN vote recently, 9 countries stood with Israel. The United States was one of them. And 140 other countries demanded a two-state solution in Palestine. The UN is completely against Israel. There's a handful of countries that are still supporting Israel because we understand that Israel is playing a game that really does benefit all of us. And that's why people in the United States are not understanding. They don't understand Qatar isn't really a good guy. Yes, they have our base there, but they're also essentially the Dubai of terrorist finance. They pay everybody, and they're a pass-through for terrorist organizations all over the world.
Go ahead.
And they have a huge reputation in the Middle East of intentionally boosting Islamic fundamentalism, even though Saudi Arabia and UAE are working against it. So even in the region itself, Qatar is kind of the black sheep, the villain of the Middle East. Saudis don't like them, Emiratis don't like them, and Qatar is also the host of Al Jazeera News. That's their national news outlet. So you've got a very powerful news outlet with international reach that leans fundamentalist Islam, that also supports a state that is the finance hub for Islamic extremism. It just so happens that they also happen to have our CENTCOM.
Why?
That all goes back to the people who made the decisions originally, right? Like that's 50 years ago, 30 years ago when those deals were made, and then they were just never brought up to speed. And now we live in this world where things change and we get sticky. We forget that one of the 9/11 one of the suicide bombers for 9/11 came from the Emirates, the United Arab Emirates.
Yeah, I guess I understand. Hey, it's a big move, and I mean it's just completely unrelated, but kind of like Hawaii. The amount of American military presence and resources there made way more sense than it does now with aircraft carriers and stuff. Not saying that it doesn't make sense, but the kind of taking over of the island when it happened strategically was much more understandable than it is now. But to move it now, the cost and whatever, and is it that way where we just have so much invested that it would be so problematic and take so long and cost so much money to move from Qatar, and where would we move it?
Correct.
I mean, Bahrain obviously is a big presence and footprint now in a similar way. Could we not just move it all to Bahrain?
I think that's a very prescient question when you consider the fact that we're moving Space Command from Colorado Springs to Huntsville, Alabama. And that's going to cause major disruption in both places. And during the time that it takes to move from Colorado Springs to Huntsville, the response time for U.S. Space Command is going to decrease because there's a disruption to defense service in that move, right? Even if you're just talking about people on planes or software being spun down, other software being spun up. So there's a very real operational impact that comes from making those moves. I think the other thing that we're seeing is what the world is using against us, which is our 4-year presidential cycle.
Yeah.
No president who initiates the move is going to remain in office long enough to watch the move actually take place. So the next president's going to inherit whatever the outcome or the blowback is. And that next president could, with the sign of an executive order, cancel the previous president's order.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the world that we're in right now.
Yeah. I've not been to Qatar. Well, it's been so long since I've been anywhere near it that I can't even pretend to understand what the footprint is there now. But to me, build everything in Bahrain, and when it's done and ready to move, make the move. It can't take that damn long, I wouldn't think. But especially given the representation that you just gave of the role that Qatar plays in the region, it seems like it's a lesser of two evils. Like you almost can't keep our presence there that's currently there, in my opinion.
It's a dangerous game,
Yeah.
and it's.
I know we traveled from Israel bombing Qatar and got on the issue of Qatar, but going back, and that's the last kind of point I want to ask you about as far as Israel and Palestine and Hamas go. But even with the historical reference, in the short term, we'll say going back to the late 1940s, there's that window of time that everybody, or not everybody, but I think most people have a general understanding of the context with which Israel exists in that window of time. When you go way back into pre-Jesus time frame of Judaism being in existence in that region and trying to understand whose land it is and borders and whatever rightful claim anyone can try to attach to that section of the world, do you think that plays a role and justifies either side continuing to fight over it to the degree with which they are?
I think the further back you go in history, I always find it interesting when people go back in history to create justification, because it's history. It's not relevant right now. So both Israeli and Palestinian claims that go back to ancient times, there's centuries of new information that have to be baked into the conclusions that we reach today. Let's just go back to World War I, because most Israeli claims happen at World War II. Well, at the fall of the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I, the Brits and the Western Allies carved out a state called Palestine from the territory that originally belonged to the Ottomans. So they gave the Palestinians a state. And then they gave Israelis the same state, they gave Jewish refugees the same state at the end of World War II, because Western powers didn't care. And that's what we all need to just admit. The French, the British, the Germans, they didn't care how they carved up the world at the end of World War I, and the Americans and the French and the British didn't care how we carved up the world at the end of World War II. We just shove everybody somewhere and let's get to the building part of this, right? That's where we are now. Where we're going is that you can't completely ignore a population of people, and you certainly can't kill a population of people or force them into some sort of exile and hope that the problem will go away. That's not going to work, especially not when there's no economic benefit to the other countries. Egypt in this case being one of them, Jordan being another one. There's no economic benefit for them taking a bunch of Palestinian refugees. Israel's doing to the Palestinians the same thing that the Germans did to the Jews in many ways, right? Minus the gas chamber systematic killing. Now we're just systematically killing with air raids. But the same kind of process is occurring simply because they're Palestinians living in Gaza. That's it. Not because they're Hamas, not because they're terrorists, just because they're in the wrong place and they have no other place to go, so now they're on the receiving end of a bomb. We have to find a way through that. More specifically, Israel and Palestine have to find a way through that because the rest of the world is dealing with their own problems also. And if the rest of the world gets involved, it's not going to be in the best interest of Israel or Palestine. It's going to be in the best interest of whoever's getting involved, whether that's the United States or France or Spain or any of the other countries that are taking a more aggressive stance in Israel.
As unbiased as possible, do you have an idea as to what a even possible fix to that region looks like?
I think all of us are stuck wondering what a realistic fix to that region looks like. You're going to upset everybody to fix it. You're going to create two states where both sides only think there should be one state, and then you're going to leave a mess for everybody else in the region to deal with when you step out, right? And when we say we're going to leave a mess, we're leaving a mess for the Saudis, we're leaving a mess for the Turks, we're leaving a mess for the Emiratis, because they're the ones. We're leaving a absolute cesspool for Iran to get involved, and then we're stepping away from it. And that's such a strategically relevant part of the world, especially for us as we get ready to face down our long-term threat, which is China, right? It's very hard to deploy our resources from the United States to the Asian theater without hopping through the Middle East to get there.
Yeah. So in short, not really.
It's going to be a mess for a long time. Yeah. And we just have to choose which mess we're going to make and which mess we're going to accept.
Yeah. Moving on to more domestic-oriented issues. Obviously, this last week, as we're recording, it's less than a week since Charlie Kirk was assassinated. I don't know about you, but I'm curious to, I guess before I share my thoughts or feelings on it, I'd like to get yours. Just generally speaking, when you heard about it, what your reaction to it was, and even more so, what that means for us as a nation moving forward.
You know, it's funny. I was just in New York as part of our book launch tour, and I wanted to be in New York for September 11th, and my wife was with me, and we wanted to show our respects at the 9/11 memorial on 9/11, 24 years later. So we were in New York, and as interesting as this is to me, it may not be interesting to you, I remember 9/11 crystal clear in my mind. And because I was in New York, and because of the scenario I was in when Charlie Kirk was shot, I will remember that for the rest of my life too. I was on set with another podcast, a major podcast in New York, and the podcast leans liberal. And we're sitting there waiting for lights to turn on and studios to get spun up, and one of the researchers sees on their feed that Charlie Kirk was just killed, just shot, right? This is the 10th of September, I want to say it was that the day he was shot? So it was 10th of September. It was about 12:30 maybe Eastern time. And this, if my memory serves me right, and this notification came across his feed. And that's all that it was. And at the table, the question was, who's Charlie Kirk?
Wow.
So then people start looking up Charlie Kirk, and they're like, oh, he's this conservative youth influencer. And then the tweets just start piling up, and then they turn on the main screen, the main TV screen, and then we're watching Fox News, because it's the only people covering it at the time. And we're watching Fox News kind of break this story. Meanwhile, the actual video footage of the bullet penetrating his skin and exiting, that footage breaks on the internet. And the liberal producers start passing it from person to person, having these incredible reactions. When you've seen somebody shot, when you see somebody die in front of you, you don't forget that. They'd obviously never seen anything like that, and the video was circulating, so they're seeing it, and exploding with like, oh, I don't ever want to see, I can't unsee that, and just like all sorts of reactions to it. And I'm sitting here and I'm watching this actively play out in front of me. I'm like, this is incredible. This is me watching one side of politics not understand the reality of life. And then, not 10 minutes after they were talking about the unforgettable view of watching somebody die, not 10 minutes after that, they start making jokes about how, is it, I think their specific saying was something like, is it bad that I'm watching this? And I just kind of think like, eh. And again, I was blown away. I was like, you guys don't understand. Oh, you don't understand that the violence that we live in right now has become so ingrained in our culture that you are blowing off a person's life simply because of his political views. And that somebody took his life possibly simply because of his political views. And that we live in a country where educated, wealthy people who run a podcast studio are making jokes about this death. And I'll never forget it. I'll never forget being there and seeing it with my wife beside me and her hand on my thigh, and we're both watching this thing play out and we're both keeping our mouths fucking shut. Because observing people being people is so informative. And that's not me saying, that liberals are bad and conservatives are good or vice versa. It's just me saying that we have become so desensitized to the value of human life that we think the politics matter.
All right, look, half-ass sleep equals half-ass results. You can train like a beast, eat clean, hit the cold plunge, but if you're overheating in bed, none of it matters. Quality sleep isn't always about how long you sleep, but how well you sleep. And science tells us temperature plays a massive role in that. Quality sleep is a non-negotiable. Recovery doesn't happen in the gym, it happens when you're dead asleep. But if you're tossing, turning, and sweating, you're gonna wreck your performance. The chili pad isn't just for professional athletes or special operations, it's for anyone who wants to sleep hard and recover harder. You set your exact sleep temp anywhere from 55 degrees to 115 degrees and let the chili pad do the rest. It's built for performance. You can set it cold as hell at night, and then you can let it gently warm you up in the morning so you wake up ready to go. No alarms, no thermostat fights with your spouse. They sent me one, I tried it, and now it's part of my nightly kit. I'm getting deeper sleep, no night sweats, and I wake up sharp. Visit www.sleep.me/micdrop to get 20% off your chili pad with code MICDROP, all caps, all one word. That's free shipping, free returns, and a 30-night sleep trial to test it for yourself. Again, that's www.sleep.me/micdrop. Sleep cooler, recover faster, perform better. Man, I don't know how you sat there with your mouth closed, honestly. I don't think I would have had that same reaction seeing that, I've never met the guy. Admittedly, I wouldn't say that I followed him all the time. I mean, I've seen a number of his interviews and, some of his events that he's done at colleges, usually clips. I don't think I've watched a single either podcast episode he's been on, interview, or one of those events in its entirety from start to finish. But I've seen enough of it to have a good understanding of what I think, he stood for and was about. And I am, in most ways, blown away with some of the reactions, but also not that surprised, almost begrudgingly so, in that, just to your point, the trivialization of people losing their lives because they said something that you don't like or disagree with, to me is such an incredible poison in this country, and it exists on both sides.
Yeah.
For sure it does. And I just, I will say that for me, kind of similarly, I won't forget either, because I was sitting right where I am this second when it happened. We're doing a show with another guest, Craig Douglas, and it's a weird environment being in a podcast episode, I think, in today's day and age, because it's reminiscent of being on an airplane without Wi-Fi, is that there's this window of time
Yep.
where you are completely isolated from everything in the outside world, which in today's day and age is excruciatingly rare. And so we took our first break, and it had just happened. And so we had heard that he was shot, took a very short break, got back into it. So we didn't know, hadn't seen any video, just, saw the blip that, there was a shooting and that he was either hit or possibly had been hit. So there's very little information. I was just like, holy shit, and so we sit back down and go for another couple hours and then finished. And then it was everywhere. And, I was completely shocked. Again, like thinking of it now, maybe it was naive of me to be even shocked. But I guess the point that I want to make is that for the rest of that day and even since, as we sit here the following Monday, it's shaken me and rattled me more than I realized it would. Because to me, there's such a difference between a politician in a position to draft legislation or pass bills that have significant impact on somebody's life. And I'm not saying that somebody with his reach and ability to communicate wasn't capable of swaying people who are in that position or even getting them elected, i.e. Donald Trump. I think he played an integral role in Donald Trump being elected this go around. But to me, there is a huge line in the sand between a civilian private citizen who's engaging in dialogue with somebody and being, shot in a very JFK style, not just on principle, but where right after what he said, the venue, the state that there are so many symbols woven into that experience that, in my opinion, should scare the shit out of everybody in this country. Because to me, it's hard to wrap my mind around that it's come to that, and not just that it's come to that happening, but I think even more importantly, the response in a lot of circles, speaking to what you experienced in New York when it happened.
Part of this conversation right now takes me right back to the beginning of our conversation today when I mentioned how much I don't like being right. 2 years ago, I started talking about how my family and I are going to leave the United States. We're going to leave before 2030. Over the course of the years that we've been sharing our plans, we've actually moved our timeline earlier. And it's in large part because this is the way that the world, specifically the United States, is evolving right now. We are evolving into more chaos because, just like adolescence, we forget how young the United States is. We have to go through a period of self-discovery to define what we actually care about. Not the propaganda lines that we used on posters to win World War II, not the propaganda posters that we still use to recruit for the military services, not the promise, not the stuff that we say when we pledge allegiance to the flag as an empty pledge in schoolrooms that kids don't understand, but actually decide what we really care about, what we really stand for, what we really believe in as the American people. We have to go through a lot more darkness before we land on our answer that carries us into the light. That is something I've been trying to communicate, trying to share, because it happens all over the world. It happens, CIA serves in countries that are in the midst of that darkness, because that's where espionage thrives. You don't want to go to a country that's clear and solid on its values and beliefs. You're not going to get very far spying in Switzerland. You're going to get far going into these developing countries, going to these dark parts of the world that haven't yet decided. When you're working with warlords who are fighting each other in Africa, or when you deal with Politburo members in China who are actively trying to undermine each other, when you deal with oligarchs who are trying to undermine each other in Europe, that's where you go to collect state secrets. That's where you go to commit espionage, because those people are confused and lost, and they haven't unified behind a united message yet. We may be called the United States, but we haven't been unified behind a message since we were bombed in 9/11. We keep getting ourselves lost.
Yeah, I agree. The level of manipulation that's taking place is staggering, but I think To me, obviously, neither of us were around in the 60s, but it seems similar to that time frame where it was a cultural awakening and very confusing and divisive time where there was a pretty clear line in the sand on two sides at least.
Yeah.
But I am curious, different from really any other time in history. I know as human beings have progressed, and let's say, the printing press being a significant contributing factor to propaganda and a country's ability to have turmoil at such a degree so quickly because the spread of information can now be so much faster. We're in a time now, though, that's unprecedented from a global standpoint where you can have instantaneous information being passed, and when you have a subset of culture that is young enough to be hyper impressionable but old enough to not be within the confines of their parents' houses, you have this, in my opinion, petri dish of just absolute anarchy possible. The level of brainwashing, manipulation, and radicalization that can take place on the screen of a phone or a computer in a basement somewhere or in a college dorm room or wherever. I mean, it could be in a ranch in Montana, to not keyhole one element of our society. But again, with the analyst hat, how big of a role are foreign state entities playing in the subversion of our society in that way, and how can you defend or defeat it?
I like your comparison of a petri dish because you're right. We're a giant experiment, right? I will also add to that, though, that the petri dish is getting bigger. That we're in unprecedented times now, and the unprecedented times that we're in now came from unprecedented times just before that. And with the advent of AI and the evolution of AI, the only thing coming next is going to be unprecedented as well. So we're in this series of unprecedented escalations in the information space. So I completely agree with you there. When it comes to how much foreign influence is playing a role, it's hard to put a percentage on that. So let me frame the question a different way. What prevented most foreign countries from influencing Americans was the incredible expense that it cost to reach Americans. You had to be printed in a newspaper. You had to be printed in some sort of magazine or journal. You had to be on television. You had to be giving your information in English from a native voice. That's what it used to take to have any influence inside the continental United States. If you didn't have the avenue to make those things happen, your voice wasn't heard. Very hard for Venezuela to impact Americans. Very hard for the Congo to influence Americans. Very hard for Iran to influence Americans, because if they couldn't get printed in a paper or put on TV from a native English speaker, we didn't hear it. Now, all of those barriers are gone. You can have an AI translate your script from Persian, from Farsi, into English. You can have that same AI put some sort of, B-roll clipped something around it, and now all of a sudden you have it on TikTok, you have it on Instagram, you have it on Facebook, you have it on Reddit, you have it on YouTube, and Americans are the ones consuming it. And then, just like we were talking about with the algorithms that seem to give you enemas of the information you may or may not want to hear, those algorithms pick up the information and spread it further and further. That's only going to get worse. That's only going to get worse because now, instead of having to actually create a line of Farsi that gets translated, you can just have an AI create a new line of Farsi every 2 minutes. You can just tell it, hey, every 2 minutes for the next 24 hours, create a new propaganda line that surreptitiously undermines democracy and in favor of authoritarianism, and send it out. And it just does it. And and the whole thing can now turn into like an assembly line of misinformation, disinformation that just gets produced and produced. And again, going back to the internet, things that go viral on the internet are not viral because of their quality. They're viral because the content creates engagement. So that's all you have to do is create content that people thumbs up, thumbs down, comment and hate, comment and like. That's all it takes to make something go viral. So the more you create, the higher the chances that something will go viral. So to answer your question, that's the long answer, obviously. The short answer to your question is I think we are only going to see more foreign engagement. And I'm not just talking about from our enemies. I'm talking about from our allies too. France wants to see a United States that's pro-NATO. Only makes sense that they're going to start creating propaganda for NATO targeting Americans. It only makes sense that you're going to start seeing, British information and Spanish information and French and Portuguese and Italian, these things that benefit them. As far as American policy goes, why wouldn't they put those out in the airwaves in English, which is a language their own native population doesn't really speak?
So to me, the burning question then is there any way for us to combat that happening?
I don't think we have a solution for that yet. I think we have people working on it, but we don't have a solution. There are definitely tools out there that identify AI. In my company, we already have filters that are actively filtering job applicants, that are actively filtering email that we get inbound, that are automatically filtering for AI-generated content. We also have filters that are looking for AI-generated bot activity on our social media platforms, on our YouTube platform. Even the people who sign up at your website, that can be programmed bot activity that's handled by AI agents. So we're actively scrubbing these things. There are tools that do it, but the tools are only as good as they are right now. They'll hopefully get better. But as long as there is AI-driven content, there will be tools that are looking for AI-driven content, which is a benefit for us if there is profit to find AI. If the profit margins for following AI are always faster growing and higher than the profit margins for finding and defending against AI, it's going to be a natural economic decline, and all of a sudden those tools are not going to be available to us anymore.
Do you have any grasp on what the percentage of AI-driven propaganda from foreign actors is versus organic? Because to me, that sounds great. If you can use AI filters to sniff themselves out, right, so to speak, fantastic. But what about, and what percentage of that influence and propaganda like manipulation is not AI driven?
I don't have percentages, but here's what's really fascinating to me. The Centers for Counterintelligence and the Centers for Information Security, as it pertains to the United States citizen, right? The government organizations that oversee the protection of our information and the government organizations that oversee the offensive counterintelligence operations from foreign countries have seen so much activity that they feel it necessary to actually warn the American public about it. Think about what they must be seeing in order for them to come to the conclusion that they need to make a statement about it, that they need to advise Americans, hey, don't trust everything you see on Facebook. It means that they can't actually fight it themselves yet. It means that they know that Facebook is trying, but Facebook isn't doing a good enough job by itself. And the same thing for all of Meta, and the same thing for TikTok, and the same thing for you name the social media platform. So they understand the volume from their point of view. They understand the threat, and their only option, or one of their options, is to simply tell us, be careful. If it was something they could control, they wouldn't even tell us about it. If it was something they believed they could control in the near term, they might make some sort of small statement, right? A statement that only exists when you open up Facebook or something like that. But for there to be national press conferences where they tell the American public, be warned, be wary, watch out, be careful, it means it's out of their control. They can't combat it themselves yet.
Yeah. It's a terrifying prospect. Do you think that it's possible that as a nation, in regards to this particular issue or concern, that it's fixable, or that we can course correct to a degree with which it's not going to just keep going off the rails? And I know it's going to get worse, but do you think, it's end times are near, civil war is imminent? What?
Yeah, I don't think we're anywhere near civil war. I don't think we're anywhere near the end times that people like to talk about, that one extreme or the other likes to talk about. I do think that we're going to have to start facing some very real, hard choices. One of those choices is privacy. Americans like to believe we have a right to privacy. We don't. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist anywhere. The right to privacy doesn't exist in the original Constitution. It doesn't exist in the amendments. It doesn't exist anywhere. What we understand as our right to privacy is 100% an inference that came from court cases that set a precedent where there's a reasonable expectation to privacy as defined by the court on a case-by-case basis. So that's really powerful when you think about it, because the right to privacy has become almost like a household jargon. We think that we just have it. We don't. We have the expectation of reasonable privacy depending court case to court case. So if you're being tried as a pedophile, you have no reasonable privacy. If you're being tried for stealing money from your company, you might have a reasonable right to privacy. We're going to have to really face that question as we continue moving forward, because if your right to privacy becomes a foundation for a foreign influence, a foreign propaganda machine to send information to the United States because your phone is on a operating system that is unmonitored, are you going to allow that to happen? Will the federal government put your privacy above the national security of foreign influence? Or will we start to see that our ideas of what our private information go away? You'll start to see search engines that obfuscate your user data. Those might just get shut down. Those might just go away because it's more important that everybody's operating system, everybody's search engine is constantly monitored. We might start to see cameras that can immediately identify your license plate and tie your license plate to your driver's license and tie it to your credit card and tie it to your bank accounts. That already exists in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. There are countries that already have that sort of surveillance state in place. We say we don't want a surveillance state. Well, what if a surveillance state is the only thing that can really guarantee our safety? That's why they exist in the Middle East. Is it more likely that we turn into a surveillance state in the United States, or more likely that we go down the road of civil war? I would argue we're going to start to accept surveillance policies long before we start bearing arms against each other.
So from your perspective, it is very much an either or?
I think that we are in a position where we need to make decisions that are hard decisions about our privileges, our rights, our access to our information, what we share, what we don't share, criminal activity. Like, imagine if it became criminal activity to share a post that originally was tied to an Iranian propaganda office. Imagine. It's not that hard of a stretch to think that if they can find that it was Iranian propaganda to begin with, they could actually trace back every American person who shared the post, commented on the post, or liked the post. There's claims that there are people there are lists that are being made for people who are speaking favorably about the killing of Charlie Kirk. So it's not beyond the realm of reality that all of social media could be scrubbed and people could be held accountable for their role in spreading disinformation.
To me, there's a lot of layers to what you're talking about in terms of being very social media and internet specific versus kind of everything else. To me, what further complicates that is, we talk about the First Amendment being, not a guarantee of privacy, obviously, but a guarantee of free speech. To me, where the waters get quite muddy is that you have private sector for-profit companies developing a technology, an app, a website, or whatever, that has an operating, right and left flank. It has a rule set to it that you agree to by signing up for it. You're not obligated to sign up for it. They can kind of run it however they want. When I see people complain about being, Instagram pages being shut down or YouTube channels being demonetized or whatever, and talking about the free speech thing, like, there is some gray area there in that, your ability to speak isn't any different. It's just this company is not going to allow you to do it within their rule set on their platform. Where I get a little nervous is when the United States government steps in, and now you have this weird mix of well, is it the U.S. government censoring company A or individual B? Is there influence? I mean, you saw it at the height of COVID with our own government influencing, bordering on threatening, maybe not even bordering. I think there were instances of DOJ and aspects of our government threatening private companies to either push a certain agenda or stifle a certain counter agenda. How do you knowing kind of the not so black and white elements of all of that, do you feel like there is a way for our government to navigate, both our government and private citizens, to navigate this kind of chapter of our nation's history moving forward in a way where there is some guarantee of privacy without just completely getting rid of everything or going to a civil war scenario?
Yeah, there's it's such a difficult time, right? And here's why. You were talking about the realities of being in the middle of a podcast episode, right? So here's the reality that even you and I are dealing with. We both understand that whatever we say in this recording could be held against us. Not by American citizens who upvote or downvote the video, but by a court of law if it chose to pursue us. So we have to be careful. Like, I can tell that you are being careful just as well as you can tell that I'm being careful about how we frame Palestinian-Israeli tensions, because we know that if you go too far to one side, you could be held culpable by the government that we serve right now. You could be held culpable by YouTube, who's being further kind of curtailed by the policy that the government is putting on YouTube, because YouTube has this user-sourced information. So we have to be careful about everything from how we talk about Charlie Kirk to how we talk about Israel-Palestine to how we talk about Donald Trump in the presidency. Because any of those things at any time now or in the future could be used against us legally, even if the law doesn't exist right now, to use it right now. So there's this challenge that we're all working through. That type of exposure is something that you and I think, are volunteering ourselves into. But the question is, what about the rest of Americans? Do they also want to volunteer into that? Especially when you consider the world of the Internet of Things, where you exist as a user behind some handle that makes no sense. My wife and I are getting ready to do a Reddit Ask Me Anything. My wife does not use Reddit, so I've been showing her how to use Reddit so that she can be successful with the Ask Me Anything that we're doing coming up, right? So she gets on and we go into a subreddit, and we're in the subreddit, and I'm showing her how to make a comment, and she's scrolling through the comments, and she is like blown away by the usernames in Reddit. She literally looked at a username and she was like, this username says, "Your mom's hot wet pussy." She was like, did somebody really create that username? And then she clicked on that username and she saw a long history of comments. And that's the world that we live. Like, somewhere there's some person hiding behind username "Your mom's hot wet pussy," and we don't even know who that person is. Like, you and I don't know who that person is. Reddit theoretically knows who that person is, unless they created a misattributable account. But that's the protection that people enjoy now that could go away if it's not in the government's best interest for hot wet pussy to be your username anymore.
It's a fair point. Interesting name for sure. Would love to know what the face behind that account is.
I don't know that I would love to know what the face is behind that account.
Curiosity gets the best of us. So there's a few things that I want to address or I guess follow up with. The first thing, in talking about, not taking certain liberties or being careful about how either of us talk. For me, I will say, like, I don't have an intention or an intentionality with trying to be careful about taking a side or not for the sake of potentially, getting in trouble or being shut down or having something used against me, as much as, at least for me, I've had enough conversations with people that I did not agree with their perspective on things, but also tried to engage with them in a way where I'm not trying to just get them to shift their perspective. I'm legitimately and genuinely trying to understand it. I've had enough of those to where, now when I talk about things where people are incredibly divided emotionally to the point of being violently so, for me, it's 100% about trying to say, how can I be as unslanted and unbiased, when I'm having this conversation with somebody, whether they share my opinion on it or not, is that, I almost view it like a teacher, or in my opinion, even a politician. I think both politicians and teachers, if I'm interviewing somebody, even if I give my opinion on something, like my goal is for the listener to not be completely sure what my politics are behind it because of how I'm talking about it, because I think it's important. There are plenty of podcasts and show hosts of whether it's podcasts or TV interview networks, whatever, that are very, very overt in what their opinion or what their politics are. But to me, I have found it very difficult to have much of a genuine conversation that actually gets anywhere with somebody who differs in opinion without taking that same approach. And so I find myself just generally trying to look at both sides. And the best example I would give that just, I guess, comes to mind is like, people that are really upset watching people get pissed off at some of these reactions to Charlie Kirk's death, to the point where it makes them want to now be violent, and seeing defenders of those saying, well, it's free speech, and, well, where were you when George Floyd died? I didn't see you, getting pissed off and being mad, or I saw you celebrating this or whatever. And to me, if I take a step back, I think, to me, people losing their life unnecessarily, irrespective of what the contributing factor or amount towards society that they inject, should be irrelevant. And to me, if you dance on one guy's grave and not the other, you're part of that system that is contributing to the problem that we're experiencing right now. To me, just be consistent. I can, look at either, for that matter, anybody who's been killed unnecessarily, who's had their life taken short for whatever reason, whether it's, a war conflict, an assassination, police brutality, a drug deal gone wrong. You can pick, whatever. But the fact is, I feel like, one of the biggest problems in this country is picking and choosing based on whether or not you thought that person aligned with you in whatever way. So to me, just be consistent. Like I am heartbroken to see Charlie Kirk get assassinated. That doesn't mean that I think it's great that George Floyd died either. Like, I think both of them suck. And I think if you don't look at it from a lens of trying to just take one step back and be as unbiased as possible, and look at it from an uninfluenced big picture standpoint, then that's just going to keep furthering this divide that we see in this country, and it's problematic. That was the first point. The second point is, in hearing you kind of walk through the navigating of whether or not to censor certain platforms or people based on, them contributing to propaganda and where you draw that line. I often find myself wondering, the anonymity that exists on the internet is one of those things that most people will say, as bad as it is sometimes, it's necessary. Do you think that we're at a point where legislation, and I've talked about this on more than one occasion, I even talk about it in the Unfuck America book, where, if you have a social media profile, basically, separating it where there's verified and unverified, and verified is no different than like TSA pre-check, is that if, now the blue check mark can't be bought, it's not because you're popular or, enough people like you or follow you or whatever. It's, do you have a government ID that proves that this is who you say it is and it's your real name on the account? Then you get the blue check mark. There's a picture of your face, your real name, and now that is a real account. And if you want to remain anonymous with locked accounts and fake pictures and fake names and all this anonymity, you don't get that level of credential. To me, that seems somewhat reasonable. Not saying it's perfect, not saying that I'm a fan of handing over anything more than absolutely necessary to the government or to any entity that can stifle voices, but to me, that at least gives you some sort of separation where now you could filter comments based on is this person verified or not, and that kind of makes more sense.
You know, it's funny because this is part of what the United States has to deal with and what we have to grow up with. We have to land on this decision between commerce and government. Because what you just laid out is a very reasonable solution, but it's not a government solution, it's a commerce solution. It's Meta that has to make that decision. It's X that has to make that decision. And there are very real profitability impact issues that will come when they make those determinations. So if you're an American citizen investing in X, and X decides to go down a road of, hey, you automatically become verified if you show a state government ID, your username becomes your full name, and your picture is your face. Like that's going to make a lot less people use X, especially with the kind of commentary that you get on X, which is going to make the share price go down, which is going to make the valuation go down, which is going to impact all the shareholders, and it's going to impact many, many other things, jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's a commerce question.
Can I interrupt for one second?
Yeah.
Agreed. And I don't think any of those companies would ever do it unless the U.S. government dictates that it is.
So then we have to be okay letting our government be so powerful that it can dictate what a commercial commerce business can do.
Yeah.
And then how is that any different than what they're doing right now? Because right now, YouTube is self-censoring. It's not censoring according to the government, it's self-censoring. It's hiring former government officials to come in and choose keywords to try to censor itself, but it's not the government putting somebody in YouTube censoring YouTube. Because companies want to remain on the nice side of government so the policy doesn't impact their profitability.
Fall's here, guys. Football season, yard work, maybe even hunting trips. But let's be honest, staying fresh through all that, not exactly easy. That's where Mando deodorant comes in. From your pits to, well, everywhere else. It's high-performance odor and sweat control that actually lasts all day long. Forget spraying on some cologne and hoping no one notices. Mando blocks odor before it starts. That's full coverage through double overtime, your weekend projects, even those long pre-holiday shifts. It's not magic, it's science. I use it myself, and it works. Mando's starter pack is perfect for new customers. It comes with a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, and 2 free products of your choice like mini body wash and deodorant wipes. Also free shipping. As a special offer for listeners, new customers get 20% off site-wide with our exclusive code. Use code MICDROP at shopmando.com for 20% off site-wide plus free shipping. That's shopmando.com. Support the show and tell them we sent you. Mando's got you covered. With deodorant plus sweat control, say goodbye to sweat stains and hello to long-lasting freshness. I agree. I guess the thing that, when you say we have to be okay with that, if I think about so many other elements of our society, we already are. Take the 3-letter government agency that is ATF. Every one of those industries very heavily regulated by the government. We've allowed, if you want to call it that, the ability of the government to dictate who can sell alcohol. Yep. States dictate what hours they can sell, how they advertise, who they can target, who they can't target. Same with tobacco, same with firearms, same with a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And the argument, I think, would be, well, those things are dangerous.
I think the other argument is how long did it take for that legislation to take place? A long time. Alcohol's been around a long time. Tobacco and firearms have been around a very long time. Unregulated, slightly regulated, to the place where now it's heavily regulated.
Yeah.
Social media is an advent of the last 20 years?
Yeah. But, to me, I think most people would say, well, those are very dangerous things. To me, those aren't any more dangerous than social media at this point. If some of the things that you're seeing have enough people talking about, are we headed towards a civil war because of, what's taken place, not just with Charlie Kirk, but in the last several years, there's been a number of things that have brought that conversation to light. You mentioned you think people will generally lean more towards giving up privacy voluntarily than picking up arms against each other. Is that to say then that your thought of the threat of civil war taking place is really not that relevant?
Correct, yeah. And this is partly my personal opinion, but also partly what I've seen around the world. Most humans that I've seen in all different capacities, different ages, different education levels, different societies, most humans lean towards a side of group survival and fitting in with a norm rather than violence. There are always violent individuals, but it's very hard to radicalize a large group of people to escalate to a place of organized violence. That's why you have professional militaries. Those people are indoctrinated, trained, and professionalized so that they can carry out violent acts. Whereas your average neighbor is not trained or organized or brainwashed or motivated to do that. That average neighbor might bitch at the dinner table to his wife or his kids, but as soon as he's like outside with his neighbor standing on his neighbor's doorstep, all of a sudden he de-escalates himself significantly, right? Until he hides behind a username on Reddit and decides to trash talk. So I say that because whether you're talking about travesties in Africa or travesties in Latin America or invasions in Europe, people don't activate. People don't become violent. People, for them to escalate to a place where there's conflict like that, they have to be motivated beyond self-preservation. They have to actually believe that what they're fighting for today is going to impact their children or their children's children in the future. When you think about the average American, they can't even be motivated to fucking get a job or go out and vote. So how are they going to be motivated enough to pick up arms against each other? How are they going to be motivated enough to stand in front of fire, like ammunition, bullets that are coming at them? They're going to put that gun down fast.
I also think that historically and globally speaking, maybe my perception of the stats are wrong. I don't have specific stats, but if I do a quick Rolodex of human history, it does seem as though, generally speaking, most human beings will pick safety over freedom most of the time. Not all of the time, obviously. I would argue even here in this country, we've done that with maybe even unknowingly, successively over the decades. We've given more and more up as it relates to personal liberty and freedom in allowing certain things to take place, whether it's firearm regulations or certain laws and legislation that's passed that makes things harder to do, whatever those things are. Something as simple as the gold standard being taken away and big banking and the Fed being institutionalized decades ago. I mean, there are a lot of examples of even where here, as much as we love to consider ourselves a free society or the freest society on the planet, there are a lot of things that's just not the case, and our track record even proves otherwise.
Yeah. You were talking about ATF and how people label those alcohol, tobacco, and firearms to be dangerous things. I think we're coming to a place now where we really start to understand how hollow that argument is. It's not alcohol or firearms that independently kill people. It's people and how they use those tools that hurt other people. And that is 100% true with social media. That's 100% true with what we put out there on the airwaves, whether it's forwarding somebody else's message, sharing somebody else's message, or creating our own message. It's how they're used that makes them dangerous. It's not that they're inherently dangerous. I was recently trying to answer for myself. I don't know if this resonates with you, but sometimes I see things in our world and I'm just so individually, so personally kind of shocked by it that it makes me want to research, why is it happening like this? Why is this happening, right? And that happened with Charlie Kirk's killing. So I went and I looked up high-profile violence in the last 12 months. In just the last 12 months, Charlie Kirk was killed, right? And then you also had you had assassination attempts on the president twice. And you had the killing of Brian Thompson in New York, who was a major CEO. And then you had other acts of violence. You had state senators that were killed in Minnesota. You had threats and attacks on state senators in New Mexico and I think in Pennsylvania. So there's all this activity happening.
And I think it's the governor of Pennsylvania. Somebody tried to burn his fucking house down.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
So So I look at these and I'm like, okay, of the people who were the highest profile, the killers of Brian Thompson, the killer of Charlie Kirk, the first assassin who actually shot Donald Trump's ear, what do these people have in common? And I found that they were all young, under the age of 30. They were all very intelligent. I mean, like 99th percentile intelligence by a standardized test, right? Super smart people. Not fully employed, Caucasian, and male, which then took me to crime statistics. Crime statistics dating from pre-COVID all the way to today, violent crime statistics, heavily lean towards men under the age of 30 who are not employed. More than 50% of all violent crime is executed by men who are unemployed or underemployed under the age of 30. It was all very shocking to me. Maybe it's not interesting to some of the people listening. But how is it that we can't find something more productive for these smart people of our society to do? What are we doing wrong that makes smart people in their prime, aged in their prime, what are we doing that makes them feel like the solution they're looking for is to kill another person, let alone to try to kill a high-profile person or a politician or a CEO or whatever else? What are we doing wrong that leads them to that conclusion? And I understand that it's just a few people who actually carry out those acts, but for every one person who carries out an act, there's second and tertiary rings of people who consider it, who think about it, who attempt and who fail. And where does that ring, how far does that ring reach?
Or, the percentage of people who are completely okay with it. I saw a fairly recent stat that it was, I want to say, in the same age bracket of, I think, it was maybe a little under the age of a little older than 30, but that consider or object to the use of violence based on political differences. And it was 58% object to it, which means 42% don't. That is a huge number of people
that don't object to the use of violence.
That think that there are circumstances where violence is an acceptable response to political differences. Like, to your question, that single statistic is how did we get to that place?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know either. When Luigi Mangione killed Brian Thompson, it only took, it was pretty instantaneous, but then it grew over weeks and months, that there were people who were happy that he killed him. There were people that thought it was justified. Like, he created a widow and fatherless children because of healthcare policy. Now somebody has created a widow and fatherless children because of political differences, right? Whatever they might be. It's the real world damage is so significant. How do we not understand it? How do we not see it? How does that 42% of people persist?
The only thing I can reasonably come up with is, and not to just always go back to internet and social media, but I don't know, if you think about the history of the human experience, children have been raised in the confines of this country for several hundred years now. And this is the first time it's ever had that type of a staggering statistic, to my knowledge. The only thing I can reasonably understand is that when you have children, and by children I mean under the age of 10 in many households, have completely unregulated, unfettered access to the internet, which is a window into anything and everything that has ever existed on the planet. I do think that has to be either the biggest or, a big enough contributing factor to make the biggest difference in that statistic being as big as it is, and seeing responses to Brian Thompson and Charlie Kirk being killed, and so many people, while maybe they wouldn't have done that, are totally okay with it happening and don't think twice that that's a bad thing.
Yeah, or don't see it for what it is. There was not to sound like callous or flippant, but the last time I was here, we were in the process of shopping for a new puppy, the first family pet for our family. And I told you about it just briefly, possibly off camera, possibly on camera, I don't remember. But we got that puppy. We got a standard poodle a few months later, and we've been raising the dog ever since. And I have learned so much about people from raising a puppy with any, like a shred of responsibility, right? I've been in puppy classes throughout my dog's entire life. I mean, he's 13 months old now. He has been in some kind of training class nonstop, with the exception of, I think, a 4 or 6 week vacation that we took at the start of this year. So we're in training classes, we're in puppy classes, and scent classes, and discipline classes, and walking classes, and I've come to appreciate that there's an expectation from the dog that the owner, the master, has to essentially frame the world for the dog in order for the dog to feel comfortable in its role in the world. And when I think about my experience as a parent, when I went to become a parent, and I again took the responsible road and started reading about parenting and joining groups that had parents and seeking therapists that specialized in parenting and all that kind of stuff, it's the same way. Your job as a parent is to frame the information of the world for your child so that they can grow up and understand where they fit their role in this world, but it needs to be framed. I feel like so much of what we're seeing with the internet, and with your point about unfettered access to the internet, that's all information that has not been framed. Children don't understand that just because it's viral on the internet doesn't mean it's common. Just because it's everywhere on the feed doesn't mean that other things in the world aren't also happening. And they need to understand that grandma's opinion when she flips on her, liberal hat isn't the truth. It's just grandma's opinion. And vice versa, when you're at the other grandparent's house and they flip on their conservative hat and they start speaking at the dinner table about whatever they believe in, that's their opinion. That's not fact, right? And it's just, without that framing, how can we ever expect the next generation to succeed? And there are already possibly 2 generations of children that are now under the age of 30 who have never had that framing.
Yeah. I mean, millennials and Gen Z 100% fit that bill. And I think, to your point, is not just the internet, but the fact that, it's 2-parent households in terms of working. They come home and, hey, we can talk about life lessons and play chess. Or here's a fucking iPad. I want to scroll Facebook or drink wine until I fall asleep on the couch.
It's true.
And so, there's so many elements of our society that keep coming back to, solid parenting, especially in that first 10, 12 years, is absolutely everything.
Do you see a solution? I love your questions about how do we fix it. Do you see a way to fix it?
So I think, in that grand context of what is the problem, how significant is it, does it demand action to the point of doing something drastic like what we're talking about? And I think the answer is yes to all of those at this point. When I see, the amount of kids that are overdosing on drugs, the levels of suicide, the levels of hate and discontent and apathy towards people dying because they have a different, set of views, politics, religion, etc. To me, those are all big enough indicators at this point to where I think something significant needs to change. And to say that I think this is the fix, I'm not necessarily comfortable in saying that I think it's the fix, but I think we're at a point where we have to have that discussion as a nation, as to how are we going to stop the bleeding and course correct, and it's going to take some really difficult decisions. The problem I see or think, with so many politicians nowadays, and I don't care what side you're talking about, is that you have almost an inability to humbly come to a camera and say, either I fucked up or we fucked up, and we're going to have to make some tough decisions, whether it's the economy, whether it's, civil liberties on the chopping block, et cetera. But we need to have some difficult discussions and make some really hard decisions, or we're going to continue down a path where I don't think our country is going to survive it. And at least start to talk about what those fixes are. Now, I am a huge fan of data. That my entire Unfuck America book is based on what are the 10 most popular things in the media that people think is the problem in this country, and what are, statistically speaking, what the biggest 10 problems are. And those aren't the same 10 problems, and they're not even close. So I think, that's where you've got to take a step back, dial down the emotion with it, and instead of having knee-jerk immediate reactions is take some time to do it, because these are big decisions that, again, like, I'm not a fan of giving the government any more authority than they already have. I'm vehemently opposed to it. Having said that, I think having, a reasonable data-driven discussion on here are some possible interventions that we could enact as a country that, based on data and what this will do to fix that data, has a high percentage chance in fixing the problem. I think far too often politicians are, I'll fix that in fucking 2 weeks, or you'll never, there's these extremes of always and nevers. It's hey, this is very difficult. The data says this. I think if we do this, there's a high percentage chance that it will fix it. I'm not guaranteeing it. I'm saying, this is a difficult decision, and it's up to you guys. Here's the A and B option. Do you want to keep going and say, hey, letting my 14-year-old scroll TikTok with absolutely no left and right flank or guardrail is more important to me than the potential outcome of this? It's being transparent of the people who are in the position to make those decisions and ultimately those changes, clearly communicating to the people and actually giving them an option of saying, the data says, this is what we're doing. If we do this, I think this is going to happen, but, this is your guys' country, not mine. I'm not going to dictate anything. What do you guys want to do? And have it be more of a discussion that way. I think it's at least time to have something like that take place.
So I agree with you that's how grown-ups handle problems, right? But the world that we live in scares me, and I'll give you an example of what's happening right now that is why I'm scared about this, right? So you just made an excellent process for how we should deal with our biggest challenges, right? Have a politician stand up in front of a camera and say, here are the mistakes that we made, here's the problem that we're in, here's the data that proves it, now you all make a decision, and let's move forward and make some hard choices. Last week, the Prime Minister of France, who's the third Prime Minister in France in the last year, that Prime Minister stood up in front of a camera and told the French people, we are 114% over debt. So we owe 114% more than we actually produce. And we need to come to a hard decision about how we're going to cut our budget so that we can pay off our debts and live within our means as a country, right? He told that to the people. He said, I'm going to call an emergency session of Congress. We're going to bring all the members of Parliament together, an emergency meeting of Parliament, for those of you who are particular about words, and we're going to let the parliamentarians choose whether or not we slash, I think it was 50 million euros, might have been 50 billion euros from our budget, in order to get us back to where we can sustain our debt, right? When he called that meeting a week later, when the parliamentarians came to that meeting, they immediately vetoed his idea of cutting the budget, and then had a secondary vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister, and booted the Prime Minister, which is how they lost 3 Prime Ministers before. So now, that forces the President, Macron, to identify a new Prime Minister. About 2 days later, he identifies a new Prime Minister, a Prime Minister who's the former Defense Secretary, a Prime Minister who is the opposite of the previous Prime Minister, who he's like, hey, we need to fix our financial problems. The French people take to the streets, and they're ransacking businesses and burning cars in Paris. because they're so opposed to the new prime minister who immediately said, we're cutting 50 billion euros. We're going to live within our means, right? So here you have this, I look to Europe a lot as a weather gauge, a weather vane for where the United States could, not will, but could go. Because Europe is older than we are, we essentially kind of grew from a European process and a European government style and process structure. And in many ways, especially when we have a liberal government, our liberal government is trying to move us in the direction of Europe, for well or for ill. So we have a lot of years of kind of following the European process. And France is a very old country. It's one of the largest economies in Europe. It's established, it's stable, it's a close ally of the United States. And even there, when faced with a fiscal debt ratio of 114%, they fucking melt down. They fire their prime minister, the parliamentarians reject the new president's choice, and the people burn the streets of Paris. The United States, as of right now, has a debt-to-income ratio of 119%, 5% worse than France, right? What would happen if we had a big boy conversation in front of our Congress where we said, hey, would we rather force ourselves into a recession and get our finances in order, or would we do something similar and start burning the streets of New York? I don't know.
I agree, and unfortunately, I think you'd have a similar outcome here. As much as I'd love to have that conversation with the American people and enough of them be able to listen to it
and understand it, right?
Yeah, like an adult, and say, yeah, this is going to suck, but this is for the greater good, and we've all got to pitch in. Akin to post Pearl Harbor, where people button shit down and sacrifice their own luxuries and standard of living to support the war effort for a number of years. I think the society then was capable of doing that. I'm not so sure that we are now. I could be wrong. I don't have a ton of confidence in that, and I suppose that's the concern for a lot of people is that slippery slope that it ends up being a dictatorship or a tyrannical government that now seeks a third term, and because it's an emergency and whatever. And I'm not naive to that. I'm not a fan of giving any government any more authority than they already have. I do find myself kind of being at odds with both perspectives, and seeing like, well, in a way, this more authoritative standpoint of having that conversation and enacting some of these things makes sense. The other side of me can also see those are still human beings, that power will corrupt them and has been proven time and time again, and I worry that is a very possible outcome also. It's a depressing thing to think about, really, because at the end of the day, that conversation is essentially the hard-ass dad, that at the time his kids are pissed, fuck you, dad, that's bullshit, give me my phone back, or whatever. Not realizing that even though he hates what the child hates what his father is doing, and he's being a prick and he's being a tyrant and whatever, but that's actually what's best for them, and they don't even realize it. There's a lot of things to consider that none of them seem like very clear-cut right answers. None of them seem like things that are maybe even possible, and none of them really seem like the likelihood of a super positive outcome is that high of a percentage either. So I don't know. I've lived most of my life pushing through. No matter how I felt, I showed up for our people, for our country, for the teams that count on us. But not long ago, I hit a wall. I was tossing and turning every night and dragging myself through the day, running on fumes, and you just can't lead like that. That's when I found Beam's Dream Powder. Beam is a proudly founded American company and run by people who share our values: hard work, integrity, and delivering results. It's a healthy nighttime blend packed with science-backed ingredients shown to improve sleep so that you can wake up refreshed and ready to take on the day. Beam sent me some to try out, and it flat out works. The first night I was out cold, no staring at the ceiling, no pacing at 3 a.m, no fog when I woke up. I felt sharp, clear, and ready to go. Dream is packed with all natural ingredients: reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin. It's designed to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up feeling amazing. And unlike other sleep aids, there's no next day grogginess, just great, restful sleep. Plus, Dream tastes incredible, and it's become part of my nightly routine. Simple, easy, and effective. So here's the deal. Beam is giving my listeners the ultimate Patriot discount of up to 40% off. You can try their best-selling Dream Powder and get up to 40% off for a limited time. Go to shopbeam.com/micdrop and use the code MicDrop at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/micdrop and use code MicDrop for up to 40% off. Sleep better, wake up stronger, and show up ready for your family, your work, and your country. Because when you're well rested, you're unstoppable. And this country needs more people like that.
I wish I had a more optimistic idea of what the future would look like.
Yeah.
But I get the sense that we have a lot more pain ahead of us. And at the end of that pain will come hard conversations and hard decisions that will probably be painful also.
Yeah.
I like your Pearl Harbor analogy because it's very true. If you think about where society was and how we changed after Pearl Harbor,
And
it was
9/11.
a drastic change. 9/11, we had a big change too, but it wasn't quite as drastic. I mean,
No.
women went from being, unseen, unheard in the household to being Rosie the Riveter making war machines,
Yeah.
right? Like that's a huge transformation. 9/11 had a big transformation, but nothing like that. And it really does feel like for us to expedite our transition to something better than where we are now, it will take something as drastic as women coming out from the house and working on the assembly line for war machines again.
Yeah.
It's going to take something like no more anonymous usernames. It's going to take something like, government policying of all information sources. It's going to take something that half of the country will call authoritarian because it's the big prick dad stepping in to say,
Give me your phone.
yeah,
Well, and I think that's the case. I mean, if you look at, take COVID as probably a mirrored example of that, is that it was devastating for, I wouldn't even say a lot of people, I'd say most people. There were also some enormous transfers of wealth during that 3 to 4 year period of heavy regulations and shutdowns. And, to me, if there's one thing I've learned from an entrepreneur standpoint is, stop trying to look at winning the game and instead learn how to fucking play it.
yeah, that is worth putting on a fucking t-shirt for sure.
Yeah, I mean, or maybe even a better way to say it would be, you can't win the game if you don't know how to play it, and to me that is the crux of entrepreneurship is understanding how to be successful and make money no matter how the rules change. As you adapt and you figure out the hack or the path to continuing to grow and be more and more successful no matter who's in office, no matter what laws get passed. You figure out a way, okay, well, that door is open. Well, which fucking door is open because of that then? Because there's going to be one. And I think that's where most people are short-sighted and agree. There's no way I could work for somebody ever again.
Not now that I've worked for myself.
No, there's absolutely no way.
It's like and for anybody who thinks that that's comforting, for anybody who thinks that entrepreneurs go to bed without any concerns, it's one of my biggest fucking concerns is I'm like, if I do something that kills my own company,
Yeah.
what the fuck am I going to do for money?
Yeah.
Because I can't go work for someone else. The idea of putting out a resume and getting a job ever again,
Yeah,
and
no
who's
way.
going to want to hire me?
Yeah.
Because they're going to be like, you were an entrepreneur once, you're not going to want to fit into my little box anymore.
Yeah. I'd love to talk about your book, Shadow Cell. Tell me, inception-wise, where did the inspiration come from, and what can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so Shadow Cell is a book that I co-wrote with my wife. It's our CIA memoir from our time as a tandem married couple operating abroad for CIA. And it's been quite a journey. It took 3 years just for CIA to clear the book, just for them
Wow.
to accept the book. The manuscript was finished in 2021, and then it went into 3 years of fighting with CIA. And ultimately, the only reason the book is published is because we threatened CIA with a First Amendment lawsuit. And they understood that while they could try to block the publication on certain grounds, the First Amendment was going to allow us to bypass their blockage and publish the book. So they decided to, instead of going the court route, clear the book instead. But 3 years ago, they deemed every word in that book classified.
Wow.
And now it's available to the public.
Damn.
The idea came because in 2019, President Trump at the time was pushing for more transparency and pushing for more of an appropriate response to overclassification. And my wife and I had worked on a very sensitive operation overseas for CIA that was pretty transformative, not just to us as individuals, but also to how the CIA carried out operations. And I wanted to share that story kind of in line with Donald Trump's promise to the American people, like, hey, let's increase transparency, let's increase our sharing of information. So the CIA review committee at the time cleared the concept for a book. I wrote them and I said, hey, I'd like to write this story with my wife, and we're going to talk about the country, and we're going to talk about the details and the mission and the operation, and we're doing it, and we'd like to have your support to do so. And the Donald Trump administration said yes. And then we went through all the work, and the Joe Biden administration shut it down and classified the book.
Wow.
So that's kind of the background story on where it all came from.
Wow. Was there a goal in mind with wanting to write it beyond just the transparency aspect of wanting to kind of unveil some of the behind the scenes kind of stuff? Was there anything else to it? Or?
Yeah, one of the things as I've grown my business and as I've grown my media footprints, one of the things that I've really come to one of the frustrations that I run into often is this idea that spying is a solo sport, that the James Bonds and the Jason Bournes of the world it's like real, that there's really just one person, one super spook out there who does everything independently and is a crack shot and never gets caught and travels the world and in Bentleys and private jets. Because spying is a team sport. 100% spying is a team sport. And in many times, the field operator who's forward deployed, that person, while they are at risk of life and limb when they're out there, is not any more important or less important, does not hold any dominion over the rest of the team. That when the team is together, everybody is valued equally. Even though from the outside looking in, we tend to dramatize and think that the operator is the penultimate person. And Shadow Cell, my wife and I's operation that we built overseas, was built around the concept of a team. It was built around multiple different disciplinary skills that all sat in a bullpen, for lack of a better word, and literally hashed out what operations we would take and how we would execute them, and built them almost grassroots, step by step. The only reason that we were able to take such a different approach to spying at the time was because CIA had been penetrated by a foreign mole. They had a mole that they had identified inside the agency, and they didn't know where that mole was. And the mole posed such a significant threat that CIA was willing to let experimental operations happen without heavy oversight.
And that's a country code name, Falcon?
Correct.
You can't say what the country was?
Correct. Yeah. So CIA gave us, when they agreed to publish the book, they gave us two stipulations, two scenarios.
Non-negotiables?
Yeah, two non-negotiables. Thank you very much. One of them is that we could not state the name of the country where we operated, and we codenamed that country Falcon. And the second was that we could not state the country names of any other country that we operated within to execute our operations against Falcon. So when you actually read the book, you'll find that we're talking about codenamed countries that could be anywhere in the world, and that's by design to protect operations. One of the reasons they wanted that was because our memoir is one of the most current modern memoirs ever written. The operations that we talk about are still happening today. And the men and women who are carrying out those operations need to be protected. We're not writing about something that happened in the Cold War. We're not writing about something that happened in Afghanistan, Iraq, 20 years ago. We're talking about operations that are still playing out in the largest adversary of the United States' backyard. Yeah. And we know that adversary is reading this book and trying to reverse engineer these operations.
What does the country rhyme with? So obviously there's a lot that goes into that. Is there kind of a Reader's Digest version of effective means and strategies to uncover a mole, whether it's specific to Falcon or anything? I mean, is there a almost boilerplate mechanism, or is it so influenced by all the intangibles and variables that there isn't? I mean, kind of like, say, jiu-jitsu has principles. So it's like you can't really walk through, hey, if I'm going to put somebody in a rear naked choke, well, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that, and do that, and then end up here because he's going to fight you in every aspect of that. So is there a set of principles that you adhere to uncovering a mole, and what do those look like?
So mole hunts they seem like they're very unique. But by and large, there are steps to how you carry out a mole hunt. And the biggest, most important element of a mole hunt is to never let the mole know that they're being hunted. So when you find a mole, you can't announce it. You can't share it with the whole community. You can't send an all-call email and say, hey, everybody, there's a mole amongst us. Keep your eyes open. You want to make sure the mole feels safe. So CIA had to find a way to make sure the mole felt safe. But simultaneously, they also had to find a way to cut access off so that the mole would no longer be able to do ongoing damage. It's very similar to what police officers have to do whenever they're trying to crack through a human trafficking ring or a drug trade ring or anything like that. You need to be able to allow current activities to continue without exposing or risking new activities being built. So mole hunts are very much the same way. So CIA first had to make sure that not everybody knew that they knew, and then they had to find a way to cut the mole off of new operations. That's where my wife and I and our operation was born. CIA knew they had a mole. They had an idea that their mole was in a leadership position, and they knew that their mole was focused on a very specific regional area of the world. So they needed us to come in as outsiders. We were not experienced in the region. We did not speak the language. We did not have a background in the region. But they brought us in because they knew that two outsiders could start operations that the mole wouldn't have access to. After you have the mole kind of curtailed in terms of the damage they can do, you can control the damage, right? The collateral damage. Once you have them carved off, the next thing you need to do is you need to start exposing them to opportunities to make a mistake. So you start sharing that there is something interesting happening, but the mole doesn't have access to it. And you need that because you need that mole to change their behavior somehow. Without them changing their behavior, you can't actually confirm with evidence that they're stepping beyond their scope of access. So imagine like the third in command of a company already is allowed to know everything happening in the company. So it's very hard to prove that that person is working against the company's interest if they're allowed to see everything. So what you have to do is create something outside of their reach that then makes them extend themselves. And that is now an evidentiary trail that confirms that that person is trying to do too much. That person is involved in something they don't have need to know for. And that's what CIA had to create for the mole. An opportunity for the mole to make a mistake, to slip up, so that they had just cause to then build a case that proved they were a penetration for a foreign country.
I mean, it's fascinating, and it makes my mind kind of go to the place where, I imagine like in a corporate world, something as simple as creating a false narrative or just making something up and only telling one person until, the 10 different people that you suspect are even in a position to be the mole, and whichever one comes out, well, that's him. I imagine that in the CIA, it's not that, or it's way more complicated and not that easy, and that when you're talking about manufacturing falsehoods, that could get people killed, and so I imagine, is that not a tactic you really can use? Or
You're exactly right. You're exactly right because of two things. First, if you fabricate information in the intelligence service, you always run the risk of the fabricated intelligence being assumed to be real intelligence and making its way to the president and the policymaker. So we can't fabricate for that reason. The second big hurdle is that anybody who gets into a leadership position at CIA has most likely participated in a mole hunt before.
Yeah.
So they know how to find a mole. They know the process, they know the strategy, they know the steps. So if you're trying to root out a mole who's in a senior leadership position, they're going to know how a mole is rooted out. So even when you create the 3 or 4 things that we just talked about, even when you curtail their access and you create some new piece of juicy bait and they have to stretch themselves to find access to it, they know that's what's happening. They can see this is a situation where I would make a mistake, and this might be because they suspect that I'm a mole. So not only does that make it more difficult, but it extends the timeline to actually catch them, because the bait has to sit there for so long. And there has to be so much kind of recurring information that lets them know it's real. It's not just bait. It's not fake. It's not phony. You have to let the pressure build up so that they can't resist making that mistake.
Yeah. Is there any other details you can share about the actual mission? Obviously, without reading the entire book sitting here, I guess what else can you share about finding the mole? Did you find them? Kind of now what?
Yeah. So there's 2 things that I think are important to me about the book. So, like many veterans from our time, I lost friends in Iraq and Afghanistan. I lost friends in the War on Terror, and I wasn't particularly pleased with how the War on Terror ended. And it was important to me because when my wife and I went to go build our operation, we had to build a new type of spying. And CIA doesn't have a new type of spying. CIA teaches every recruit the same way every time. We have an MO, a modus operandi. And our modus operandi is very similar to every other foreign intelligence service in the world. So when CIA tasked us to create something new and original, we didn't know how to do that. We don't specialize in new and original, right? So we had to start thinking through, how do we do something that other people won't expect? How do we do something that our biggest adversaries in the world are not going to expect? And we landed on following terrorist ideology, because what my wife realized as a terrorist targeter, what my wife realized was that the United States was the only country really participating in the global war on terror. Yes, we had allied support from France and Germany and Spain and Europe and the UK, right? But the United States was the one really footing the bill. The United States was the one putting boots on the ground in large numbers. The United States was the one taking the losses. And because of that, we had an intellectual advantage. We had a competitive advantage in understanding how terrorism worked. And the only person who knew how terrorism worked better than us were the actual terrorists themselves. So when we built our operation, my wife came up with the idea that we should model our operations off of terrorist operations, which was something CIA had never done before. And it was something that for sure all of the other intelligence companies of the world, all of your Chinese, Russian, Iranian, North Korean, Turkish, Saudi Arabian, every other intelligence service in the world did not do that because they didn't know how a cell would operate. So the reason this is called Shadow Cell is because we built our own little terrorist operating cell to execute our operations. And that's important to me because the only reason we were successful is because of the men and women who lost their lives in the war on terror, who were able to bring back their MO, able to show us how a cell worked. And it made me feel, even while we were in the field, it made me feel like we were bringing honor to the men and women who had made that sacrifice, to the people who had spent their entire military career fighting overseas in the desert, wondering what it was all for. This is one example of what it was all for.
Yeah, and you can't say who the mole was, or?
We can't say who the mole was because identifying the mole verbally identifies the country.
I gotcha. One thing I know, the war on terror, generally speaking, is not that it's over, but Iraq and Afghanistan in particular are wound down to the point where it's obviously a shell of what it used to be. There's nobody in Afghanistan. There's very few troops in Iraq. But just to the point of, I just want to say that the contribution of Canadian, Polish, UK, Australian, New Zealanders, and there's a host of other countries that sent a lot of their young men, that a number of whom didn't come back, I think is important to acknowledge and appreciate, because a lot of those guys, did some pretty amazing work, and just not to discount it by saying we were the only ones, with the losses. But
absolutely.
When you were in the field, was there ever, or I guess in this particular mission, were you ever ordered to do or ended up doing something that you had kind of a moral objection or conflict to, and you decided to do it anyway, or it made you decide not to do something that you should have?
So not with the operation that we cover in Shadow Cell, because Shadow Cell was unique in that we were given essentially a blank check to execute whatever operations we saw fit. We fell under a different rubric of leadership. Our leadership was exclusively decentralized, so we didn't have to clear anything with the main office. Everything was cleared through our local leadership office, who then coordinated with the main office in Langley, Virginia. So as a result of that, we literally got to architect our own operations, which was very exciting and very enjoyable, because we got to do what we always wanted to do. That said, the men and women who made up the cell, myself included, as well as the several of the people that we talk about in the book, as we talk about the team sport of espionage, we had all been sent on missions where we had to carry out things that were morally ambiguous to us, or morally questionable. Thank you. And we didn't want to do that to ourselves. We wanted to find a way that we could maximize our contribution by staying well within the realms of what we were comfortable with. That doesn't mean that we all agreed all the time, but it certainly meant that when we sent somebody on an op, there was no questionable moral alignment with them for the op they were carrying out. And if we identified somebody for a mission and they didn't want to do that mission, then we could hand that out to somebody else in the cell who would carry out that operation.
Yeah. Kind of in that same vein, I mean, when you're in an undercover or somewhat covert status, is there a defined limit to with which you're allowed to go to maintain that cover?
The short answer is no. There isn't anything that's bureaucratically or politically aligned that says you can't defend your cover if it requires this. You have a lot of latitude as the operator to choose how you defend your cover. So whether you choose to do drugs, whether you choose to have sex with a prostitute, whether you choose to participate in an illegal transaction of some sort, what matters most is that you communicate and document whatever activity you've participated in. They don't want you to hide it. If you try to hide it, then it creates problems with your polygraph, and it creates problems with your clearance, security clearance updates, etc. So they would rather you make every mistake in the book and then just properly document it and format it, because then everybody knows that it happened. And that was certainly our situation when we were operating as well. We wanted everything to be very transparent, because we knew right from the get-go that what we were doing was questionable. From the get-go, when you're building a terrorist cell to operate against an adversary on behalf of the Central Intelligence Agency, you know you're doing something that needs to be documented, right? And then you need to have the top cover to make sure that you're moving everything forward. So when our operation first started, there was not a lot of leadership support. When we told people that we wanted to manage our communications and model our MO off of known Al-Qaeda activities, and we didn't want to carry out terrorist acts, but we wanted to benefit from all of the financial tools, the communication tools, the deployment tools, the mission planning tools that we had learned from Al-Qaeda. There was not a lot of support for that. But as success started to come, more and more people started to support us. So by the end of the Shadow Cell operation, we were not only very successful in our target country against our target adversary, but CIA had actually asked us to start training our model to other cells that were operating in other parts of the world as we continued to kind of expand into this new spy era.
Yeah. Are there, to your knowledge, other shadow cells that are currently ongoing in that same capacity?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, at risk of giving a little bit of the book away, in 2016, 2 years after my wife and I had left CIA, a new director took over and reorganized all of CIA. And when he reorganized CIA, he reorganized it in the same MO as our shadow cell. So John Brennan, being the director at the time, reorganized CIA so that instead of having a group of analysts that sat in one place and a group of operators that sat in a different place, he brought everyone together under regional kind of pipelines and made it so that inside of any particular office, targeters would sit with tech people and translators and operators and clandestine docs people, and you would have a whole operating unit that would be forced to cooperate. And it created big stirs. It was one of the biggest intelligence reforms in history, in recent history for sure at the time, and it created big waves, and it made John Brennan not a very popular director for CIA. But I guess in his defense, he was modeling that off of what we had shown success with, not just in our region, but in sister regions that we had developed as well.
What I'm taking from that is that his shit reputation is your fault.
Luckily, I also have a shit reputation, so.
In that kind of moral gray area, how forgiving is the CIA when you're stretching that boundary?
It is not a forgiving place. Yeah. Culture at CIA is not great. You know, I don't know what your experience is with the SEALs, but what I've seen a lot is similarities between SEAL culture and CIA culture. In that when you are in good favor, everybody has your back. But when you do something that any one person kind of questions, then the culture is that oftentimes they
mob mentality almost. Yeah.
They back the person who's being cautious, and they're very unforgiving on their own. So if you are anything other than the consummate silent professional, then there's a critique. If you write a book, if you claim success, if you leave without retiring, there's a negative stigma that goes along with it. You're supposed to be the quiet servant. You're supposed to be the sentinel that serves and then doesn't benefit from your service.
30 if you like it, 20 if you don't, right? Retire no matter what.
Yep.
If the CIA had never cleared your book, would you have just said, well, tough shit, or would you have?
No, we would have pursued. So we already had we had a litigator in place, we had an attorney in place, we had a whole case locked solid, because we knew that we would win a First Amendment lawsuit. CIA knew that we would win a First Amendment lawsuit, and their biggest concern was not losing the lawsuit. Their biggest concern was the publicity that would come from me at the time with my media footprint,
yeah,
and charging a lawsuit against CIA.
Yeah. Well, it sounds fascinating. I know there's some miscomm on getting the book, but I'm really, really interested to check it out, and it sounds awesome. I know we've talked a lot about some current events already, but I've got a few bullet points that I'd love to just kind of lightning round run through with you and get into. You have talked openly about leaving the U.S. in the next few years. A, why, and B, I've seen some clips recently talking about spies disappearing a lot lately, and I'm assuming maybe that has some contributing or contributes to maybe that decision. But what's the deal with that?
Yeah, the big thing, there's two big reasons why my wife and I are looking to leave the United States. The first is primarily centered around our kids. We want our children to understand what life is like outside of the United States. Because frankly, I think a lot of the conflict that we have inside of the United States is because people don't realize how special this place really is.
So it's not a permanent move?
No. I mean, it may be permanent, but it's not like we're going to denounce or renounce our American citizenship. Anywhere we go, we're going to be Americans. We may become Americans who also have dual citizenship, but we're always going to be Americans. Because what I want is to give my children the opportunity in the future to choose which passport they carry in which country. When you're only an American citizen and you have a passport, which interestingly is only 25% of American citizens have a passport. When you are an American citizen traveling on an American passport, there's only certain places you can go. And anywhere you go, you are very clearly an American citizen and can be targeted as such. When you have dual citizenship, you can choose what passport you're carrying. Even if that means you travel on an American passport from point A to point B, you can travel on a second passport from point B to point C. That's a big part of how we executed our operations in our shadow cell. So we want to give our children that flexibility, but we also want to give them the opportunity to understand the United States is a special place. The freedoms that we have here are special. The wealth that we have here is special. You know, even the traffic patterns that we have here are unique compared to any place else in the world. You go to Vietnam and they don't even follow the traffic laws, right? So we want to give our children that opportunity. The second reason that we're leaving is more my own personal preference. I know that the United States is in the position to have a very difficult 10 to 15 years ahead of it. I'm of the experience level, the age, the wealth demographic that I don't have to put my children through that awkward time frame. I don't have to put my wife and I through that awkward time frame. So we can sit out adolescence, America's adolescence, we can sit that out somewhere else while we still contribute to the United States, while we still pay our taxes and we're still American citizens abroad and we still do what we can to make an impact, and we raise our children as active and future contributing members to the American society. Why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't we go to a place where there's more opportunities as an American to also expand our children, advance our business, and also avoid the chaos that's happening here?
Some would say, not that you haven't served your country, but that, hey, it's a group effort here. Like, for the individual that would make the accusation that you're turning your back or letting somebody else get their hands dirty in this time where we need all the capable men in the country and women, to help get through this time period, what would you say to them?
And I don't think they actually understand how the world really works. What the country needs right now is patience and people to contribute to the economy. That's all we are. Remember, we had this conversation earlier today even. All we are is cogs in a giant machine. All we are is individuals who create a tax base. The actual fight that needs to happen is not from the working level American. The fight that needs to happen is from how we vote for the people who lead us. We have to vote for our Congress. We have to vote for the men and women who represent us. And then they have to actually represent what we care about. That's the fight that needs to happen, and the policy that needs to happen, and the change that needs to happen. It has nothing to do with us as individuals. So whether you're here paying your taxes or whether you're in Australia paying your taxes is irrelevant. What isn't helpful is if you just renounce your American citizenship and run to Mexico, or go give up your American citizenship to become Chinese. That's not helpful, but you can serve the purposes of what the country needs right now from anywhere in the world, which is why you have so many wealthy people leaving the United States. You have more people buying golden visas, you have more people buying property abroad, not because they don't believe in America, they very much believe in America, but they also understand that the growing pains that are happening here don't have to be pains that they put themselves through voluntarily.
I mean, I can certainly understand, I would call it the luxury of being able to do that, which not many have. So having it, obviously, it's, anybody who's in that position, it's their prerogative to do so. To me, there is another half to the all we are is statement of a tax base and a cog in the machine that contributes financially. Is that the other side of that coin, in my opinion, are examples being set in real time that people can observe, that set the standard and the expectation for how we should behave and conduct ourselves and contribute to society on the ground here. I do think that's important. Because if everybody who has that ability says, we're going to let this one ride out and go somewhere else, now you have nobody, knocking the kid off the bike for being an asshole in your neighborhood or, whatever. I mean, there's a million examples of setting that example that I do think are important. No different than, because if we use the adolescent adage or comparison, it's like, how do you be a father to your kids, from another country? If it's the adolescent that needs to grow the fuck up and have that fight or figure things out, like, I think it's tough to do that if everybody who has the ability to leave does, when they're some of the most impactful members of society.
Yeah, I understand that point of view, and I would layer on to that, yes, it's every individual's prerogative, but there's also, and again, this is me speaking personally, there's a level of prioritization. I am a father. I am a father first. I am also an American. I am also a veteran. I am also a business owner. But I only have a limited period of time to be the role model and to be the protector and to be the provider for my children. So if my priority is them, I have to do everything that I can do to give them the most opportunities, the best experience, the most well-rounded lifestyle, the most exposure to the world that is the world that I will be leaving them while I have them. I often tell my wife, if we didn't have children, we would most likely stay in the United States. For all the reasons that I already shared with you. Like, it's going to be a very good time to be an entrepreneur and to be wealthy in the United States, so why would you leave? Keep all your money in US dollars, stick it in the stock market, stick it in real estate, and you're going to be filthy, filthy rich in like 10 years, right? So why would you leave now of all times? Likewise, if our children were grown and they were already 18 and they were already American citizens and we had no way of shaping their future citizenship, we also probably wouldn't leave. We'd go buy a big house on a hill, invest in a second company or a third company, grow our wealth, and stay here in the United States and just travel abroad as tourists, right? Because we would have missed the window to benefit the children. So not only is it each individual's prerogative, but you also have to actually be honest about what your priorities are. If your priorities are your children and you live in a dangerous neighborhood, wouldn't you move out of that neighborhood if you could? What's the benefit of staying in the dangerous neighborhood on the principle that if I leave, then who's going to be the role model for all the other people in the neighborhood? For me, I'm of the opinion, I am much more of the opinion that if I can go and let somebody else shine, I should. If I feel the need to stay, I need to contribute to my maximum.
Yeah, that's a fair point for sure. And again, it's obviously everybody's own personal choice. Are you comfortable or not comfortable sharing where you would go?
We're actually not going to tell anybody where we go when we actually choose.
Yeah.
We're in the process now. We've been traveling for about a year now, and we've got another year and a half to travel while we finalize where we're going. But we talk often about the places that we are considering. We're considering the UK. We're considering Australia. Every place has their problems, but being an American abroad is not the same thing as being a foreigner in their own home country, right? No. And there are absolutely benefits to being an American in Britain and an American in Australia. Yeah. We're also looking at Portugal, Spain, Italy, Croatia, Costa Rica, Mexico, and Brazil.
And Venezuela.
Venezuela would be an interesting option.
Maybe.
With a second passport.
Yeah, no shit. If you wanted to completely change your identity and become unrecognizable, could you do it?
I think all of us could do it.
With that hair?
Just cut the hair off. If I cut the hair off and shave, it's basically game over, right?
Yeah, totally different.
Yeah, right?
I don't think anybody would recognize you.
Yeah, so I will be changing my identity at the end of this year, inshallah. There's a couple of media opportunities that may not let me cut my hair in December, but otherwise it'll all come off this year. And then I will still feed my audience. Like, I'll still feed the people who follow me at Everyday Spy, and I'll still feed the people that follow my YouTube channel, and et cetera, et cetera. But I will take myself off the road. So my touring days will be greatly limited, if not totally ended, while we prepare to relocate abroad.
Yeah. Are you of the Muslim faith?
I am not.
No? You just threw that in there for shits and giggles?
Inshallah. So I served in Abu Dhabi, and one of the things that I learned is that they have this inshallah, mashallah, alhamdulillah, and these sayings that they use all the time, that when you live in a Muslim faith, you start to pick them up as well. Yeah. And I always find it funny. And you'll find service members all over the world that still use the same terminology they learned in the Middle East.
Yeah. When you look at America 10 to 15 years out, what scares you the most?
The income divide scares me the most. And there's one very specific reason why. Wealth is great for the wealthy. But as wealth grows for the wealthy shrink in size. And then as the wealthy shrink in size, everybody else grows in size. And we live in a country, for well or for ill, where everybody has an equal vote. Even though they don't have equal contribution, equal responsibility, equal patriotism, equal love of country, equal education, equal commitment. Even though they don't have equal anything, they all have the equal right to vote. And it's just a numbers game before the people who are voted into power are voted into power by a large majority of low-income people. and the representation for the high-income people doesn't exist. Even though the high-income people are the ones generating the jobs, generating the businesses, generating the GDP for the most part for the entire country. It's the Venezuela predicament. That's exactly what happened in Venezuela. 1980s Venezuela was a beautiful place to be, and over time, over about 15 years, the wealthy became very small, and the poor became very large, and then the poor all had equal vote, and they voted in Chavez. And Chavez nationalized everything, took the money from the wealthy. The wealthy fled. Some of them fled and were able to keep their money. Some of them fled and lost everything. And then it was all dispersed among the poor. That's a story that plays out over and over again, but Venezuela is the best case study for us as Americans to understand because it took less than 20 years.
I mean, it's, in short, the disappearance of the middle class is the end result of that, and I agree, it is shrinking at an alarming rate. We talked about this the last show to a certain extent because you were talking about the education of your children and your methodology towards that. More than 80% of the nation's youth are in public education, the public education system. Do you trust at all that institution? I mean, I already know the answer, but do you feel like they're brainwashing the next generation?
Yeah, I want to trust the institution of public education, but I can't because of the history that it has shown us. The public school system is not created to generate innovation and ingenuity and independence. It's created for all the opposite, to create dependence and obedience and structure that will feed an industrial complex that isn't there anymore. We don't live in a world where people take jobs in factories. We live in a world where people graduate from high school and then go on to graduate from college and then go on to graduate with a master's degree and don't know what the fuck to do with themselves because the entire educational system has failed them. We need to change how we look at education, and that change is never going to come from the Department of Education itself, because to change itself would essentially be to undermine its own requirement for existence. So that's why I don't trust it. Do I think that it's there to brainwash us? I think it was absolutely designed and architected to condition a workforce. I don't know that it was conditioned to shape politics or conditioned to shape thinking. I think some of it has been perverted over time, and it has come to a place where now if you're 18 years old, you are probably liberal leaning and you probably believe that you're entitled to something because that's all you've ever known. But there are plenty of examples where that isn't true. There are plenty of conservative youth, there are plenty of independent youth and libertarian youth that are out there, but I think that the people who find their way to individual responsibility have found their way there through something other than the educational system.
Yeah. I mean, from your perspective in that realm, is there a fix to that?
It's a major overhaul of the educational system. Imagine, so 80% of children, I think is what you said, 80% fall into the public education system. Well, that means 20% don't. Well, what does that education look like for them? You have homeschoolers. Some of the most impressive people I've ever met have been homeschoolers.
Same here.
I mean, it's just unbelievable. What I met in college and in the military and the CIA, the homeschool populations are pretty fantastic. That's why we chose to homeschool both of our children when they were young, to give them that opportunity. But then you also have non-traditional schools. You have Montessori schools and Waldorf schools. Both of my children, we actually just stopped homeschooling them this last year because they outpaced our ability to teach them. Their appetite for learning outpaced our ability to teach them, so we had to put them in some kind of school. So my daughter goes to a private school that's non-traditional, that's a mix of Montessori and Waldorf. My son, goes to a Waldorf school. Because these non-traditional alternate learning styles are suited to help them grow the way that they think, to grow their idea of civic responsibility, to grow their core skills in reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also build a better rounded citizen. So why don't we try to find a way to make 50% of public schools also follow that same methodology instead of 80%?
Yeah. I think it's a great strategy. I mean, my kids are graduated and out of the house, but looking back on it, even though it wasn't that long ago, it was still a different time than it is now, especially with, the resources to be able to do it, with online educations and curriculums that are, able to be streamed or whatever just didn't exist then. But I do I do wish that homeschooling had been a more realistic option. Not that it wasn't, I just wish it had been more realistic, I guess.
It's a challenge. It's a major challenge. And I understand anybody who wants or considers it but can't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the biggest transformations for my wife and I is now that the kids are in a school, life is radically different. And I'm not saying it's radically better. It's just radically different. The whole house used to not even wake up until 9 o'clock. Now we're up to alarms at 6 o'clock so that everybody can be out the door by 6:45. And then the schools that we picked were not schools of convenience, they were schools of purpose. So they're very far from our house. So we end up having these long commutes that we didn't previously have. And then our children are now thriving in their new schools, but my wife and I are dealing with the soccer mom problem. Who's picking up who and when, and how much time do we get with each other that we never got before, and how do we spend that time, and how do we balance work versus, together time, etc.
Yeah. No, I can only imagine. I mean, that's tough even in a public education system that's right down the street. There's still a fair bit of that. We talked a little bit about this earlier, but I'm curious from the analytical side, do you think that China, Russia, Iran, combination of the three have the ability to engineer a civil war and bring it to that point through bots and AI and social media manipulation?
So CIA has a group of people in office that's called the Covert Influence Group, CIG. And what we do in our covert influence approach is the same as what all first world intelligence services do in their covert influence approach. And it's not to seed influence for a particular outcome, because it's very hard to actually get the outcome that you want based on the inputs that you put in, especially when you're dealing with a foreign culture. You might feed it things that you think are going to work, and then as it goes through the culture, something very, very different, and even against your outcome might come out the other end. So instead, the strategy is to create as much chaos and doubt in the public institution as possible. So when I look at what China, Russia, Iran, North Korea are doing, when I even look at what our allies are doing, because make no mistake, Israel, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, they all work against us too, right? Whenever they're influencing American activities, they're not trying to create a specific outcome. They're trying to create as much chaos and doubt in the system as possible, because whether we like to admit it or not, the whole world is our enemy. When you're the superpower, everyone else wants to see you off the throne. So you can't trust anybody. And sometimes they're working together, and sometimes they're not working together, but their impact is magnified and amplified by one another. But without a doubt, the whole world wants to see the United States drop. Because, just like we were talking about with the wealthy and the poor, when there are less wealthy, there are more poor. So people want to switch that out.
It reminds me of the saying on the micro level. It's the macro version of the micro level of friendship, and that all of your friends want to see you do really well, just not better than them.
Yes.
So and to understand clearly what you're saying is that the United States also does that in other countries.
Correct, and other countries do that with us.
Yeah.
We don't want to see, look at our relationship with NATO. The United States doesn't want to see NATO strong and independent. They want to see NATO completely dependent on the United States. So we posture and we politic to try to find the balance where NATO they concede enough to keep us in NATO. But we always have the threat of, hey, we're going to leave NATO and then you're going to be screwed. So that tension cuts both ways.
Yeah. I guess circling back to the previous question, though, do you think that any other country has the ability to actually incite civil war, that it could get to that level?
So I don't trust that any country out there has the tools, the focus, the ability to be able to seed our people to that kind of action. I do believe that they can contribute to a decision that our people reach on their own of violence, but to believe that there's like some team of people in China who are inciting us to civil war, I wouldn't believe that for a second.
Contributing factor, but not the sole or deciding factor.
Correct.
In that, along those same lines, obviously China and some other state actors have already embedded, whether it's spyware, ransomware, or viral infections to infrastructure that have shut down, whether it's flying or air travel networks, water treatment facilities, power grids, etc. Can you kind of encapsulate the level of threat and the severity of that danger?
I would say there is no part of American culture, American existence, that is more vulnerable than our utilities. And our opponents know that. Our electrical grid, our clean water system, our shipping and rail transit, our food supply chain, these are all areas that we are incredibly vulnerable, incredibly dependent on government institutions. And government institutions, like we said earlier, are not particularly efficient, they're not particularly professional, they're not particularly secure. So dating as far back as the early 2000s, we started seeing very systematic testing from foreign adversaries attacking gas and oil lines, attacking electrical grids, attacking water systems, attacking traffic lights, and testing to make sure that they could. And that's exactly what we've seen in recent history too. When they shut down airports, when they shut down flight approach patterns, when they interfere with even the pipelines up and down the East Coast, those are all small incursions, whether they're being attributed to Russian freelance cyber criminals or not. Those are all government orchestrated attempts, tests to see how we would respond. Because in the event of full-scale conflict, or even in the event of retributional conflict, that's the kind of stuff that they know will make America move.
Do you know if obviously it's fixable, it's a heavy lift and is nothing that would happen quickly. Do you have an understanding of our nation's prioritization of making those things far more secure? Is that a priority item?
Yeah, it is not a priority item. The way that our country approaches priorities is always through a mix of politics and imminency. So the most imminent threats are the ones that are addressed first. And then the most politically advantageous efforts are the ones that are addressed second. So when it comes to the modernization of America's national electrical grid, that's a big, expensive problem that is neither imminent nor politically beneficial. So it just keeps getting kicked down the line.
Yeah. How many, not just Chinese spies, because that seems to be our biggest adversary in I think my opinion, or most people's opinion from a big picture standpoint, but spies in general. How many spies do you think are in the United States actively spying from
Our
foreign?
rule of thumb at CIA is that there are always 100,000 undercover foreign operatives operating on U.S. soil at any given time.
Spanning all different types.
Spanning all different types all across the country. So penetrations, trying to make it into the military, into government, into the educational system, in college universities, saboteurs, information collectors, narco traffickers, weapons traffickers, human traffickers, backed specifically by foreign adversarial governments. So we're not talking about freelancers, we're not talking about like cartels in Mexico. They're not backed by the government. They are also active, but they're in addition to the 100,000 that we assume are here at all times.
Does that fall into the eminence and politically expedient category where we're taking that as a bigger concern?
It does when the nature of their operations are imminent threats to life and limb, what we call life and limb. Yeah. Meaning if it's going to threaten the life of an American citizen, then it bumps up on the list. If it's just, like for example, if it's a Russian operative in Wisconsin who is trying to collect steel secrets from Booz Allen, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman, there's no threat to life and limb. So we might let that person operate for a while, and we just keep tabs on them via NSA or via some other FBI-like counterpart, because It's just frankly not worth the diplomatic outrage. It's not worth the political intrigue. It's not worth the potential chaotic panic that Americans would feel if we made a public spectacle out of arresting this Russian spy in Wisconsin, where most people don't even think they are.
Yeah. And I guess it ultimately boils down to there's only so many resources, and so you have to triage it that way.
There's two. I'm just going to add. There's a second element. There's a limitation in resources, so you have to triage appropriately. But second, the primary office, the primary department, bureau for protecting America is the FBI, and inside of FBI, it's a law enforcement branch or a law enforcement organization under the judicial branch. So they still have to follow American laws. So they can't actually take a course to trial or take a case to trial unless they've got legal ramifications, evidence, a body of evidence, a case that they can actually prosecute. It takes time to build that case. So when you're FBI and you're looking at 100,000 spies across the United States, yes, there's a dollar and cents and time limitation, a resource limitation, but on top of that, you're also thinking, whether you like it or not, you're thinking, which of these cases can I investigate and adjudicate and take to trial and win, because that's what I need if I'm going to climb my professional ladder. If I have 25 cases and none of them go to trial, then it looks like I didn't do anything for a year. I'd rather pick one case, take it to trial, win, and now I have a victory under my belt this year, and I'll do it again next year. And that's not going to get you very far.
To me, that's a flaw within our government that incentivizes victory, kind of such an extreme, like it's only a victory if it goes to trial and you convict and whatever, whereas the kind of basic premise of catching people and preventing attacks sits on the back burner because of the career path structure.
I agree with you. It's a major flaw that leads to our government intelligence and police services focusing on cherry-picking operations.
Yeah.
And even the men and women in uniform, even the men and women doing the job, don't like it.
Yeah.
Right? They think it's wrong. They think if there's a bad guy doing bad shit, let's go stop the bad guy. That's where we all start at the lower levels of our career. But then just by trying to survive 7 years, 10 years, 12 years in a career, we start to become worn down and really pragmatic about, well, what I really need is 3 cases to reach full closure.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm going to try to cherry pick for this year.
Have you worked with the FBI at all?
Absolutely.
Yeah. What do you think of the state of where they're at now?
I think I think a lot of government servants are getting a really bum rap right now. Secret Service is getting beat up. FBI is getting beat up. I mean, yes, there are flaws and problems and changes in leadership that are making things very difficult. I think a lot of the heat that Kash Patel is getting over this Charlie Kirk incident, it's not deserved, right? Kash Patel wasn't appointed because of his proficiency in law enforcement. He wasn't made the head of FBI because he's a great investigator or particularly talented with communicating the status of an investigation. That's not why he's there. That's part of his job now that he is there, but that's not the core purpose that he's there. The core purpose that he's there is so that Donald Trump has someone that he trusts in a very important position so that they can stop the weaponization of government and possibly expand into rooting out whatever elements of government may not be operating in the best interest of the administration, right? So you got to look at what Kash's job really is before you start to criticize him for the mistakes or the missteps that happened with the Charlie Kirk incident. It's not fair. It's not fair that Secret Service has been put under such scrutiny. It's not, people don't understand that the limitations of public servants are so significant that when they make a mistake, it's very rarely ever because of their individual incompetence. It's because of a whole multitude of factors that all kind of created a perfect storm that led to an error or a mistake.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly understand that. I am curious. I guess, what do you think that Kash Patel and the FBI right now is in a better place than it was 2 years ago? And not from public's perception. I mean, solely from an operational competency standpoint.
So From an operational competency point, I think that it's a clear answer no, because so much disruption has happened at FBI. There has been such a loss of operational continuity that, of course, operationally, they're going to have been disrupted. But that's different than whether or not it's better than it was 2 years ago. From what I've seen of FBI officers that I work with and I'm friends with, they're actually quite happy to see that the old kind of institutional grandfather rabbi system of promotion and award and assignments has been disrupted, along with the evolution of a kind of flawed system has created operational disruption as well. So the one comes with the other. There's really no way that you can get rid of bad people without also upsetting the operational process that was dependent on those bad people.
Yeah.
So I would actually say, from my experience, FBI is in a better place now than it was 2 years ago, but there are also operational competency issues that are present because of the disruption of changing that guard.
Yeah. It's interesting because I have generally an opposite experience, not entirely opposite, but I've had a number of former FBI agents on the show. I've had some who even are current, but couldn't say that they were at the time. The closer you get to current or current, the less happy they are with how things are going. And to me, the unfortunate part with that is that I think they and anybody with any similar background whatsoever, when Trump was elected, had a very optimistic view or prediction on how things were going to go, and in a number of ways, at least it seems like for a lot of them, they don't feel like that it's gone that way.
When they say that they're not happy with the direction, what are they not happy with?
The gutting of so many people. I guess to oversimplify it, the throwing out the baby with the bathwater is a lot of really, really solid dudes have gotten fucked over because they, were in a position where, that element was part of the January 6th investigation that was unfavorable to the president or anybody that he is friends with or whatever, even though maybe they didn't have shit to do with it, but because they were
assigned the job.
Yeah, stuff like that.
I agree with that, and that I think is totally fair, because you're right. There has been retribution where it's almost like to clear out the cancer, they're cutting away good skin too.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a very paralleled experience to the way we handled Iraq after the initial invasion. Gut the entire fucking military. It doesn't matter if there's good guys or people that can reorganize the Iraqi military, and we can lean on them for a security force. It's fuck all of them, and you saw how that panned out.
Yeah.
I see some parallel there for sure. But
inefficient government, man.
Yeah. Well, and I also think letting emotion cloud policy. Being retribution oriented in your decision making process instead of just doing what's best overall. Vengeance rarely, if almost never, serves a good purpose. Do you think America will still be the global superpower that it is in 2035, or do you think China will take that spot by then?
So it's not just me. I mean, this is economists with PhDs and Nobel Prizes, right? Like everybody kind of has painted a picture that the United States will not be the same superpower that it is now by 2030, let alone by 2035. Whether or not China becomes the new superpower is an open question. Will they actually outpace the United States? Will they simply meet parity and be equal to the United States? Or will they close the gap and be closer to parity, but still not fully equal? In all three of those instances, America's lead is significantly less, right? So the value of the American dollar, the impact of American influence, the benefit to American businesses, all of that is on the decline. And we have to face that reality, that economically speaking, and economics drives everything else. I know people don't like to think of it that way, but economics is what drives domestic policy, it's what drives foreign policy, it's what drives military power, it's what drives education, it's what drives opportunity. As we lose that edge, as we lose that lead, somebody else is picking it up.
Yeah. Speaking of the U.S. dollar, do you see a future where the U.S. dollar collapses and people are fighting for basic resources here at home?
So I don't see anything that dark happening here, and here's why. What I see happening sucks, possibly more than just the full-out collapse of the U.S. dollar. Long before the U.S. dollar collapses, it will simply lose its preeminence around the world. It will become like the Turkish lira, where only one country uses it, worst case scenario, only one country uses it, and that country completely controls the valuation of that bill. Because most of our transactions will be in some foreign currency, potentially Chinese renminbi. So it's not like there's going to be one day where the US dollar just completely disintegrates. It will be less and less valuable, less and less useful, and then all of a sudden, your kids and my kids are one day being like, you know what, we're going to open HSBC accounts. And we're going to ask our companies to pay us in renminbi instead of paying us in dollars. Yeah. And when we need dollars, we'll convert our renminbi into dollars because we'll get a better exchange rate. But we'll live in some foreign currency.
Yeah.
I can see that happening, and for me, that's even worse than just watching our dollar completely disintegrate, and then we try to figure it out again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is not a counter argument, but an opposite scenario that comes to mind for me, the Turkish currency being at one end of the spectrum. And forgive my ignorance on global economics, but the British pound is a weird example of, to my knowledge, it's only used in Britain. I mean, because they also use euros there, but the British pound kicks the shit out of the American dollar by quite a bit. Like dollar for dollar, it's actually more valuable now, which is weird. I don't know if you have any insight on that as to why there's such a difference between the British pound and the Turkish lira.
Pound sterling is interesting. It's not that the pound is necessarily doing well, it's that the US dollar is doing so poorly. And the euro is the same way. We have seen the euro and the pound be closer in valuation to the US dollar, almost one for one. Even though now it's like $1.20 to the British pound, I think, and to the euro as well. So it's not necessarily that their currencies are kicking our ass. It's that they're stable, and ours are all over the map. And sometimes we're doing well, and sometimes we're doing poorly, but theirs is much more stable.
It reminds me of a common saying in special operations when working with foreign military special operations, and we come to the realization it's not that we're that good, it's just that they suck that bad. They have a lot of commonality there. Do you think that crypto plays any role in the potential collapsing of a U.S. dollar?
So cryptocurrency, I want to differentiate between cryptocurrency and decentralized cryptocurrency, if you will, right? So something decentralized like Bitcoin. Bitcoin is only useful if people adopt Bitcoin. Meaning like if storefronts adopt Bitcoin or if ATM machines adopt Bitcoin. That's the only time that Bitcoin becomes useful, is if you can actually extract the value out of the cryptocurrency that is decentralized. What we're seeing is a move towards centralized digital currencies, also cryptocurrencies, but centralized. The digital dollar, digital crypto, digital currencies that are already alive and well in China and across Europe, right? A centralized currency is the only currency that any government ever is going to actually adopt and reward, because governments need to make money off of their centralization of that currency. They need to control how much is coming in, how much is going out, the value of that digital currency, and they need to make like, a 0.5%, 0.02% off of every transaction, because that just creates free money for the government. Something that's totally decentralized completely works against all of the incentives for government. So the government would, if not fully block a digital, uncontrolled, uncentralized cryptocurrency, they would for sure never incentivize their populations to use that currency. And I understand all the people whose panties are in an uproar right now about Bitcoin, but they know it too. They've been investing in Bitcoin since the early 2000s, and you still can't really use your Bitcoin anywhere. There's a handful of ATMs in any given city that will give you cash for your Bitcoin. All you can really do with Bitcoin is buy it and sell it. And you can only sell it for what people are willing to pay for it, which drastically varies in price. Even though it's strong right now, like November of last year, it was half of what it's valued at right now. So that's the challenge with cryptocurrency. Will it destroy the US dollar? I think digital currency is the wave of the future, especially if you tie digital currency to the blockchain and make it fully auditable. But will Bitcoin kill the US dollar? The US dollar is always going to be more valuable than Bitcoin because it's so much more useful. And I already know what people are bitching about right now. Well, how can you say the US dollar is more valuable than Bitcoin? Because the US dollar has the staying power of multiple governments to back it. Bitcoin could literally end tomorrow. We have no control over it. If everybody just decides they don't like Bitcoin anymore, tomorrow the value becomes zero.
Yeah. With Bitcoin, I completely understand that being essentially digital gold, where I see both an irony and a more kind of confusing ability to predict where it's going is in the altcoins that have both strategic and utility value to them. When I see things like XRP
Yep.
and Solana and HBAR and Ethereum, Cardano, I mean, there's a handful of them that big institutions are considering replacing the SWIFT, cross-border payment technology with. To me, that there is a weird both irony and a little troubling outlook in that it makes sense, but only from an institutionalization standpoint, where your average everyday citizen doesn't even realize they're using it because it's that well integrated into big banking industry and financial networks. And so to me, the second layer of difficulty there is the faster that's implemented, the more likely it is that the top 4 or 5 big banks in this country collapse because of that decentralization aspect and an inability to make money and control that aspect. Where the irony comes in, to me, this is the whole point of crypto initially, was the decentralization aspect of it and cutting out the middleman, and me being able to pay you that fast, from phone to phone without including JP Morgan Chase in that transaction. But I feel like we're on this weird tipping point or precipice of it's either going to kind of go back down the hill. I mean, it's almost like a potential avalanche that's at this peak, and it's either going to get pushed back down the hill where it's not institutionalized and there's too much ability from big financial industry to be able to squash it, or they go full nuts, completely on board it, and now it's again it's you're sending money from me to you or vice versa, utilizing some sort of blockchain or ledger of some of these altcoins immediately, and we don't even realize we're using it because it's just embedded into the app. But the tricky part is how that would be rolled out, and now it defeats the whole purpose of why Bitcoin initially was started in the first place. So to me, it's quite a bit of uncharted territory that I'm not sure how it's going to shake out.
Yeah, and I think that you're hitting on a couple of really relevant and important things that many people aren't considering, right? Bitcoin's original intent does not equal the use case for the average person, right? The average person doesn't really care that their money is centralized. The average person is just trying to make money and spend money and save money. So the person who's actually afraid of the government controlling their money or blocking their finances or whatever else, whatever makes them feel like they need a decentralized currency, that is a rare person, which is why for such a long time, Bitcoin didn't really do much. The use case for digital currency has significantly increased, especially during COVID, when people wanted to stop handing actual cash back and forth. So now all of a sudden we see a rise in wallets that are holding digital credit cards, and you're buying things with your phone by waving your phone instead of waving a credit card, right? So we've seen a huge increase in the use case utility of digital currency. We have not seen a swing in the use case requirement for decentralized currency. And at the end of the day, any business survives off of its usefulness to society. Only in the event that we really do see government overreach and a total violation of our rights and privileges does decentralized currency really become a thing. I have a friend of the family who saves all of his money in gold. Not gold, it's like gold ledgers or gold stocks or whatever, actual gold pieces. So in his kitchen, underneath a board.
Where's this guy live?
So in his kitchen, underneath like a loose quarter board, you can actually, like, he knows which one it is, and you can pick up the quarter board and pull out a little fishing tackle box, and the fishing tackle box is full of pieces of gold. Little gold coins, large gold coins, whatever else. And I've sat there and looked at his gold collection with him, and I'm like, why do you have this way? And he's got the whole thing figured out, because if society collapses and the dollar becomes useless or inflation skyrockets, you're going to need gold in different size pieces, because you won't want to pay for a flight in 1 full ounce of gold. You'll want to pay for a flight in like 0.02 ounces of gold in just a little flake that you can give somebody. And it's just so incredibly inefficient, and the use case for it is so far-fetched that really all he has is just a tackle box of gold.
Well, yeah, I mean, because to me that scenario is ridiculous, because from my standpoint, if you're at that point in terms of a collapse of society, flights don't exist.
Yeah.
You know, to me at that point, it's who's the warlord leader of this neighborhood, and what are they just going to go fucking take from the other group of people? I mean, it's going to be completely tribal, purely, you know, I mean, it's going to be pure anarchy.
Yeah.
There's no two ways about it. I disagree with that. Now, gold, to be fair, just in the last little over a year has gone from low 2000s to mid 3000s, which percentage-wise is an enormous fucking jump.
Yep.
But I still think it hinges on the fact that its value is woven into the same fabric of society the way Bitcoin is it's valuable because enough people value it that much. And in the collapse of a society, I don't think anybody would give a flying fuck about gold.
Yeah, and I agree with you totally, which is why it's so interesting to me that people are trying to protect themselves against the worst case by investing in these things that are like art.
Yeah.
Art is only worth what someone's willing to pay for it. Gold is only worth what people are willing to pay for it. And if we really do get to a place where government overreach is so significant that we have to cash in our gold chips or our Bitcoins, who's going to take it? You know, you can't buy a pizza with your Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think a pizza place would even exist in that scenario, you know.
That's true.
And yeah, I agree. Like at that point, gold, any type of digital currency, any type of cryptocurrency, art, I mean, it's all useless at that point.
We're trading rope.
Yeah, I mean, generators and gasoline and ammunition,
water,
and you know, stored food. I mean, you know, which God hope we never get to that point. But along that line, do you think the average American family needs to be preparing in any way for something that nobody's talking about in that way?
That's a hard question. So it's a yes and no question. I think that if you are a parent with children that are dependent on you, it is wise to have an alternate plan. A plan to leave your state, leave your city, leave your house, leave your country, do something so that if some unexpected disaster strikes, you're not fixed to your residence. You need to be mobile. Mobility equals survival. Mobility equals success. Mobility equals options. Whereas if you are unprepared and you don't have a go bag and you don't have an emergency fund in the bank and you don't have 2 credit cards and you don't have whatever else, then you're not mobile. You're kind of stuck dealing with whatever happens to you from around you. Yeah. So especially if you are a parent with children who depend on you, you should have a plan. If you're single, maybe you're going to be okay, like just winging it if the worst case happens. Because let's be honest, a unexpected disaster is not a high probability. So you're probably safe not preparing for a big disaster if it's just you, because you can wing it on your own. Likewise, if your children are grown and you yourself are still healthy and able-bodied, you could probably just wing it then too, especially if you have retirement funds or you have lots of money saved in the bank for yourself, you'll be fine. But the pressure really lands on the person who has to try to keep a wife or a husband and 2 kids alive.
Yeah. We've talked about, you and I maybe even talked about it in the last episode, and I've talked about it with a number of people. I don't want to beat the dead horse, but I am curious just because of your background. A lot of people swear Epstein was a state-sponsored intelligence agent. There's a million theories. I'm sure you've heard all or most of them. Do you have an opinion on big picture-wise what the deal is?
So, just like many people, my opinion has shifted with the information that I received. And where I land now as the most realistic explanation for Jeffrey Epstein is that he may very well have been what's known as a confidential informant, a CI, for FBI. More than a Mossad asset, more than ever a CIA asset or anything like that, because he was actively involved in illegal activity. And he was actively involved in illegal activity supporting American citizens. That makes him the perfect kind of target for FBI to pursue, because FBI could grant him leniency or forgiveness for his crimes as long as he reported the crimes of other American citizens to the FBI. And then the FBI would be building cases on those American citizens. So when you think about the culmination of all the accusations as well as what evidence has been released, for me the most significant piece was when the Trump administration promised to release Epstein files and then reneged on that promise. When I saw that didn't make me think that there was some juicy bit on Donald Trump or juicy bit on anybody else in office. That made me feel like there was a government contractual obligation to protect Jeffrey Epstein, which really only exists when you have a national level confidential informant informing on American citizens.
But wouldn't that really only be relevant if he was alive?
No, because he's not the only confidential informant. Right now, living and walking around the United States are thousands, if not tens of thousands, of confidential informants who are American citizens. They have all been promised that their cooperation will never be publicly disclosed and that the crimes that they committed will be forgiven, right? So if you air Jeffrey Epstein's role as a confidential informant, you're breaking the promise to Jeffrey Epstein, but you're also showing all the other confidential informants in the world, you can't trust us to keep your promise either.
How do you reconcile the crimes that were committed, the people that he was involved with, and from what seems like optics-wise, no closure or consequence for any of that?
This is a question that people don't like the answer to, right? You have to let go of the moral value that you place on the crime. And you have to understand that to the law, crime is a crime. When you break a law, you go into a criminal court system, you're evaluated based on your peers, you're punished according to the judge. That's the way the process works. Crime is crime. It's not like there's good criminals and bad criminals. I know we call them white collar and blue collar. It's not like killing one person is any better or worse than killing 10 people. Right? Morally, we like to think it is.
People, it is.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
But seriously, we all like to pass a moral judgment on it, but in the eyes of the court system, you've committed a crime and now you need to be evaluated based off of the context and capacity of your crime. So while we look at Jeffrey Epstein and we think we know what his criminal activities were, even though not all of them have been disclosed to us, the truth is, if he was providing information that would bring 12, 15, 300 other people to justice, that's the kind of thing that the U.S. legal system is willing to forgive in exchange for giving us information on what the others are doing. Remember how you asked the question earlier about whether or not there's anything we can't do to protect our cover? The same thing is true for a confidential informant. There's not a lot of limitation on what they can and can't do to maintain the access that they have to illegal activity.
Well, you're right. I don't like that answer. The one thing that still puzzles me, or two things, I guess. The first thing is, with as loose-lipped as our United States government is in every facet, I mean, whether it's politicians in the House of Representatives, within the presidential cabinet, I mean, staffs, aides, you name it. Like, there are leaks everywhere all the time. It's like nobody can keep anything a fucking secret. So what is it about this that with the amount of people that have been involved, that there's such a high degree of competency in terms of keeping a lid on all of it to the degree with which they have? That, to me, is puzzling.
Most secrets are kept. I know it's easy to assume that there's many leaks. It's easy to assume that people can't keep a secret.
Because you're only hearing the ones that are actually leaked.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
There are so many more secrets that have never been leaked.
The second thing that I was going to mention is, do you think that he actually killed himself or was murdered?
This is another reason why I really like the kind of thread that says he was an FBI covert confidential informant, because if he was a confidential informant, that would explain the disappearance perfectly, because the Federal Bureau of Investigation would have the capacity to terminate the feed in the prison, evacuate him under pretext that would have no trail, and relocate him somewhere where people couldn't find him in witness protection. So it fits very nicely. I will say that aside from him being rescued by FBI, he was in a jail, he was in a prison for what is considered one of the most morally heinous crimes. All the other convicts absolutely despise people who abuse children, especially people who sexually abuse children. So he would be a prime target for any kind of violence inside the prison system.
So do you think he killed himself or no?
It's a tough one, because everything leads to the same kind of rational outcome. A man who thought he was safe, actually finding himself. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with somebody who was very wealthy, who lost a legal case and was going to prison, and the shit that goes through their head about, I should just kill myself, I should stop talking to my family, I'm as good as dead anyways, even when I get out, I'll never have access to my money or have access to my family, my life is over, why not just end it now? Like that is really what goes through their head, especially people who were at the top of their game, who are then brought to, a concrete box.
So from your perspective, there is a very real possibility that the FBI exfiltrated him out of prison and he's still alive.
Yeah, I mean, I see 3 equal probability outcomes that we just don't have enough information to land on. Somebody got him out of prison because they had the power and the promise to do so. The prison system turned against him and they killed him, and then they lied about it, because inside of the prison system, of course you're going to kill a child rapist, right? Or he was so ashamed and he recognized he was just days away from being killed by the prison system anyways, that he decided to control it for himself.
Yeah.
It's a weird equal probability in all 3 areas.
The 2 things that make me skeptical on the FBI, well, 1, the FBI getting him out, and 2, that there's something else going on, is that, again, I know you're saying that most secrets are kept, but something this high profile and the sheer number of people that would have had to have been involved to pull that off, like, there's got to be one of them that would be willing to sell a $100 million exclusive book deal story to somebody. To me, that's hard to imagine a scenario where there isn't at least one person that's willing to do that. The second thing is that missing minute or so of footage that nobody's been able to explain, who's in a position that actually could explain it. Any thoughts on that?
Those are the very same reasons why I'm so torn between the 3 probabilities myself.
Yeah.
Because nobody is explaining that missing 90 seconds to 2 minutes, right? Nobody's explaining it, but that doesn't mean that nobody can explain it. It just means nobody is explaining it. So why? Yeah. And how is there footage before and after but not during? Just imagine the amount of effort it would take to make that happen. Yeah. Not to mention, once it occurred, letting the investigation discover that there is a minute and a half or 2 minutes missing. Like there's just enough error there that shows that it's imperfect, that shows that it's flawed. So there were definitely human beings doing something, but why and how and to what extent?
Yeah. I mean, it's all, again, tough to rationalize, and I think, another thing that further complicates it for me, and I'm curious to get your take on, is both Kash Patel and Bongino, leading up to being put in the positions they're in, had pretty significant positions on he didn't kill himself, there's way more to the story, we're going to release the list, yada yada. Now they get into these positions and it's, nope, killed himself and there's nothing else to see here, move on. Even the president did that, which, I mean, he ran on that.
Presidents, politicians, they always lie. They always run on one thing and then don't do it, right? I mean, the most famous example that we all talk about is no new taxes. We had a fucking president who lied on a stand after swearing to tell the truth. And that president, Bill Clinton, is still considered a hero by many people in the United States. So the idea that presidents don't tell the truth, I mean, come on. That's kind of a hollow argument that we can't really defend. And to think that Donald Trump, who's an experienced negotiator, an experienced businessman, who's controlled much of his fortune through the manipulation of the legal system, why do we think that this guy of all people is going to be the person who keeps their campaign promise at the end? He's going to do whatever he thinks is in the best interest of accomplishing the overall agenda that he's trying to accomplish.
I get that 100%. I think where for me personally, I separate that from policy is the nature of the crime. And I know that there's emotion wrapped into that, but that's the reality of it, is that, if you say, hey, no new taxes, and then you're taxing, well, I get that. Shit happens, things change. For me, this feels different than that.
I think part of the reason it feels different also, I agree with you that there's the moral reprehension of the crime. But the other thing that we're not talking about that people need to understand is the way that the cabinet was built. The way that Donald Trump positioned the people who were loyalist to him. He didn't appoint people into places where they were the most qualified. He appointed people into the places where he needed the most loyalist support. And again, we shouldn't be surprised to see that the whole chain of command follows Donald Trump's administrative direction. Generally speaking, the whole chain of command follows the president's chain of the president's direction. We didn't really start to see that breaking down until the first Donald Trump presidency. But since then, especially after what he has learned from being president once, he is definitely not going to make the same mistakes being president the second time.
Yeah. All fascinating stuff. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have?
Outside of my favorite Scotch, I think we're good for now, man.
What is your favorite Scotch?
So I've really taken to Islay Scotches that actually come from Scotland.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan right now of Johnny Walker Green, which is not one of the more popular Johnny Walkers that you can find. And then there's all sorts of incredible Scotches from the Islay regions that have that peaty, smoky flavor that end in like Bach or Berg and are just totally isolated to Scotland.
Yeah.
So excellent options.
Ironically, it's that character trait of that alcohol that makes me despise it. I haven't drank in years anyway, really. I mean, other than like the occasional bourbon with my dad at Christmas or something, but even that's been a few years. But what is it about Scotch, or those Scotches in particular? Why that and not, whiskey or gin or cognac or whatever?
It's great. So Scotch is a whiskey.
Oh, I mean,
but I get you.
Standard.
American whiskey,
Yeah.
or Canadian whiskey, yeah. So I'm a huge whiskey fan now. I kind of committed this year to learning as much as I could about whiskeys and bourbons and all the various whiskey alternatives. So the two things that I found that I really like about those smoky, peaty Scotches, and anybody who knows that they like them will understand what I'm saying immediately, and anybody who knows that they don't like them will probably appreciate this point of view. So first, it's that the flavor is so complex. You might smell and taste the peat and the smoke at first, and it's really earthy and kind of unpleasant. But all of the additional flavors that come along with it are so much more diverse than when you drink like
Coors Light.
for sure when you drink a beer. But they're very, very different than when you drink like a Highlands Scotch, or when you drink a Lowland Scotch, or when you drink a whiskey straight out of Colorado, or a whiskey out of Kentucky or Tennessee, right? There's just so much more complexity there. So that's the first thing that I like. And with that complexity, you start to appreciate that peaty, smoky taste as part of the complexity. The second reason I really like them is because as you age Scottish Scotch, you really start to taste a huge difference between a 10-year Scotch, a 20-year Scotch, a 30-year Scotch, a 60-year Scotch, etc. Because that aging process really changes the flavor. Whereas with, say, a bourbon, a 10-year bourbon and a 12-year bourbon don't taste that different. A 10-year bourbon and a 24-year-old bourbon don't taste that different.
I would make one exception, that's Pappy's. You know, because there's 10, 12, 15, 18, 20, and 23, I think, and they do all taste quite different.
Distinct.
You know, that's really the only one that I can think of that. Because even, years ago when I did still drink, Blanton's bourbon is quite good. And they have a bunch of different variations of it that all have kind of a similar foundation, but are different, not just in proof difference, but in finish, flavor as well. But to me, it is fascinating, and I even though I don't drink it and don't like it, I can appreciate the nuance of kind of the difference in character, and how much pride the manufacturers put into making it very distinct in its own way, which definitely is cool. But what else are you into? You have any hobbies?
Yeah, I run a business and I'm a dad, and that pretty much,
so no.
That's everything, for real. The Scotch is what I do in the few instances that I don't have to either be actively running a business or be actively being a dad.
Right before you take them to school. Yeah. Now, give me a Scotch and make it a double. I got a long drive ahead of me. What's next for you, I guess? You got, you're promoting the book now, obviously, but beyond that, I guess, you're looking at moving out of the country. But anything else business-wise or big picture-wise that you're planning on doing?
Yeah, it's a great reminder. Everybody listening, go find Shadow Cell. The audio book is breaking records. It's a bestseller for multiple weeks already. The hardcover book is very popular as well. So go out, hit it up on Amazon, find it on Barnes & Noble, anywhere books are sold. Find Shadow Cell. I actually signed a 2-book deal with my publisher, and my second book, which is all about how I built a company using spy skills. That book is in its final stages of pre-publication right now.
Oh, cool.
Just approved by CIA literally in the last few weeks, and that'll be hitting the printing press and going on to bookshelves next year at about the same time. So September of next year, my second book will come out. And we should be relocating outside of the United States about 4 months after the second book goes live.
Yeah.
And we're leaving that space because one of the things that I'm finding is I get more and more keynote invitations, I get more and more corporate training opportunities, I get more and more, I'm speaking to EU Parliament. I got an invitation to speak to the EU Parliament
cool.
coming up in November, December. So there's really big invitations that are coming, but those invitations are international. So a big part of what Everyday Spy is doing for the next foreseeable future is continuing to spread our message internationally.
Is that a paid gig with the EU?
No.
Yeah, I wouldn't figure.
No.
Yeah, I would imagine not. Is there a chapter?
Even if they could pay, I don't know what they would be able to afford.
Yeah, well, it'd be in euros. Is there a chapter in the next book about waterboarding your kids?
There is not. No. I would not recommend waterboarding your kids.
Yeah, probably not.
I will say this, though. There's a YouTube influencer out there, a guy named Tommy G. So if you look up Tommy G on YouTube, he actually asked me and a friend of mine to show him what it feels like to be waterboarded. And he documented the entire thing on YouTube, and YouTube let it run. So if you look up Tommy G and you find that video, I think we recorded possibly in April of 25, but you'll find it, and you'll see exactly what it's like to be in a CIA detention center.
Was Julian present?
Julian was present for that. Yeah. You know Julian Dory too, yeah?
Yeah, well, I was on his show a little over a year ago, and he was just here a couple weeks ago.
Oh, that's awesome. So Julian was kind of the second person going with Tommy through the experience.
Yeah. Which one of them handled it better?
It's a good question. So they made it to different lengths. Tommy went first. Julian got to kind of sit hooded and just listen to Tommy's experience as we did it to him, as we took him through everything, all the graduated advanced interrogation techniques is what we put them through. And ultimately, Tommy kind of collapsed when his hood got wet, even before we started actively pouring it over his face. When his hood got wet and he realized how restricted breathing gets, but he was still being put through all the same tension positions, that got him to a place where he was like, I'm out, I'm done, wave the white flag. And then we got to put the screws to Julian next. And Julian, after seeing what Tommy had gone through, was able to go a little bit farther. But the same thing got Julian. Once that hood gets wet and your breathing is restricted, but you're still breathing heavy from all of the advanced awkward positions, they start to break down. But it's just incredible to watch. Anybody who's still listening, I absolutely encourage you to go over to Tommy G's channel and watch that video, because it makes it so understandable what it's like to be either in the interrogator's shoes or in the interrogatee's shoes.
Yeah. Minutes-wise, how long did each of them last? Did you?
I think Tommy made it about 8 minutes. And when we started putting the screws to Julian, I think Julian made it 12 to 15 minutes, only because Tommy was face down for much of the interrogation, so the water pooled up around his face. Where for Julian, as he was sitting up, he was stronger, but once we put him face down, he also collapsed it pretty quick.
Yeah. Well, be sure to bust Julian's balls about that. Man, it's always a pleasure to sit down with you. I appreciate your perspective and your ability to communicate that perspective immensely. So thank you for coming. I appreciate you taking the time out of the busy entrepreneur and dad schedule to sit down with us. I hope the book does really, really well. Please go check it out, Shadow Cell. Anything else you want to mention before we wrap up?
No, I appreciate you having me, Mike, and I appreciate you focusing so much on what you do.
Yeah, well, truly my pleasure. To the listener and viewer, I hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't, you can choke yourself. And until next time, this is Mike Drop.